Joining us tonight is Jake Rattlesnake.
I like to go by Lord Rattlesnake or Lord Jake, most base chat of all the lands.
You don't have an argument. Present your paper or shut up.
Everyone's view is definitely inherently biased. So this is when debate becomes very interesting.
I can hear what you're saying, but then I can see that you're dressed as a cat.
I'm a dog.
You said you like to go play fetch.
Wolf, yes.
So how does that tie into your relationship? Like, what are you looking for if you're a dog? Yeah, I think that John Jr. will be president one day. If I was a gambling man, I'd put money on that.
Founder of Rattlesnake TV, Jake. Man, I really appreciate it, dude.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another phenomenal Rattlesnake TV debate night. We've got an interesting one for you today. We've got Austin Offscript, aka Austin Julio Broughton. Did I say that right, Austin?
Yes, sir, you did.
And we've got Andrew Wilson debating reparations and systemic racism in the United States of America. You may recognize Austin from his appearances on Jubilee. He also did a debate on reparations a few weeks ago against white privilege, which was an interesting one. Enjoyed that. Also did a modern day debate against Rob Noor. So been getting around a fair bit lately, which is good. And you guys will recognize Andrew Wilson from his many appearances on the channel. So going to be a great one today, guys. We're going to have 5-minute opening statements followed by 60 to 90 minutes of open dialogue and then super chats. Just a fair warning, guys, when it comes to super chats, we will read from the most and down, and if we get time, we'll read them all, but we probably won't get time to read anything under 20, just as a heads up to all of you guys. In terms of the house rules here, guys, it's going to be, if you guys ever feel like you're being overtalked or you're not getting enough of a say, then you can appeal to the moderator, and you can ask me if you would like to get more speaking time. Try not to get personal with the insults. We like to have a nice, clean debate without getting into any of that personal stuff. And I'm sure I had other rules, but I can't really remember them right now because it's like 1:30 a.m. But anyways, Austin, you'll be starting off with your 5-minute opening statement. So with that, 5 minutes on the clock, my friend.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I want to thank everybody that's watching this for being here. And tonight, I just want to begin with a very simple proposition. A society that believes in justice cannot celebrate restitution when it benefits us and then reject it when it challenges us. So my position is very simple. It's not that America is an irredeemably racist nation. That is not my position. My position is not that every racial disparity is evidence of discrimination. My position is not that any living American should be held personally guilty for the sins of the past. My position is much simpler. Government caused harm. The government can measure that harm. Therefore, the government has an obligation to repair that harm. The first premise of my argument is simply this. Systemic racism existed because government institutions deliberately enacted policies that directly disadvantaged Black Americans. This is not a matter of opinion. It is a matter of historical record. Federal, state, and local governments enforced slavery, enforced segregation, they enforced exclusion from housing markets, and enforced policies that prevented millions of Black Americans from accumulating wealth that could have been passed to their children. The question is not whether these policies existed. The question is whether we are willing to acknowledge the consequences that they produced, and they are long-lasting. The second premise is that the racial wealth gap did not emerge from thin air. Wealth is not created in a single generation. It is transferred across them. Homes are inherited, businesses are inherited, investments are inherited, land is inherited. If one group was systematically prevented from acquiring and passing down assets for centuries, then it should not surprise us that the descendants of those families possess less wealth than anyone else today. If a father is robbed before he can leave an inheritance to his children, the injury does not disappear when he dies. His children inherit those consequences. The third premise is simple. Justice requires restitution when a wrong has been committed. We recognize this principle everywhere else. If the government wrongfully takes your property, compensation is owed. If the government wrongfully imprisons you, compensation is owed. If the government destroys your land through eminent domain, compensation is owed. Why should government-inflicted racial injury be the one category of harm for which compensation is considered unthinkable? And finally, as a Christian, I would argue that restitution is not merely an American principle, it is a biblical one. Scripture teaches forgiveness, but it also teaches restoration. When Zacchaeus encountered Christ, he did not simply apologize, he made restitution. Justice was not completed by words alone, it required action. You know, the whole faith without works is dead kind of thing. So let me be clear about what I'm defending tonight. I am not here to defend black people having perpetual victimhood. I am not defending racial resentment. I am not defending the idea that black Americans are incapable of succeeding without government assistance. I am defending a principle older than the Constitution and older than the Republic itself. When a wrong is committed, the obligation to repair that wrong does not disappear simply because time has passed. And if government policy helped create the injury, then government bears responsibility for helping repair it. That is not socialism. That is not Marxism. That is not communism. That is not charity. That is not collective guilt. That is restitution. And restitution, simply put, is justice.
All right, Andrew, 5 minutes.
Right. Thank you for that. Let me get into my opening here. Sorry. I was just taking some notes as we were going through yours. So I'm going to take a few minutes to lay out both my argument and my opponent's general position. As it turns out, I got this exactly right. He made the exact argument that I thought he would. My opponent here has a fairly standard left-wing position on reparations and institutional racism. It just goes something like this. The United States endorsed slavery and held slavery as an institution for most of its early history. Due to this, even post-freedom for said slaves, they didn't have the same advantages as other Americans, especially white Americans, due to the fact that they were not compensated for hundreds of years of slave labor, starting even before the founding, by the way. To offset this, the United States government needs to take corrective action to create equity between Black Americans and other Americans to offset this injustice, which has kept Black Americans perpetually behind due to wealth inequality, racism, and other sub-factors which are fundamentally unfair. Like I said, predicted it perfectly. Now to my argument. Black regression in the United States has very little to do with institutions at all, let alone institutional slavery or the institution of slavery. And instead, it has to do with what I call preference theory. In order to be successful in life, there are many factors, but there are essentially three factors which all factors relate to. These factors are true of humans regardless of demographic, location, tribe, city, nation, and are historically true at all times and all places. And it doesn't matter if it's Jesus Christ or Genghis Khan. Those are social skills, delayed gratification, and long-term goals. These are often referred to in a variety of ways. The 3 C's of success, which is just a variation, or Stoic philosophy, which gives another variation. There are many variations of these ideas, but they come down essentially to these 3 factors. Now, how these are deployed will depend greatly on culture for application, but regardless of culture, the people in it who are successful will almost always, without exception, have these 3 traits. Now, some cultures frown on these traits, and as you can imagine, the success rate for such cultures tends to be low in almost all aspects of technology, language, arts, culture, and agriculture. To nobody's shock, cultures with large white populations tend to prioritize these attributes and maximize them, leading to high amounts of individuals who are successful. Many Black Americans, on the other hand, have otherized themselves from what they perceive as white culture, determined to make a subculture which rejects, quote, white tenets, which is mostly just the application of Christian ethics, which pushes virtue. And if you follow virtue, these attributes tend to come along with it. It's pretty simple, right? Through self-otherization, meaning not part of the dominant cultural value set, these attributes are rejected. So how's that done? Let's look at social skills. Many American Black people purposely utilize a form of inferior English as language, which makes it difficult to understand and have common parlance with them. They dress in ways that are normally impractical, with clothing many times too big for them, creating an actual functional clothing issue where their undergarments are purposely showing, not to mention being unfit for work. Once upon a time, this could possibly have been attributed to poverty, but in modernity, these clothes are often more expensive than their more functional counterparts. Violence is much more acceptable socially and publicly, leading to social disputes being ended in a violent manner in comparison to other population demographics, further eroding social skills. Next, delayed gratification. Bling culture, get that bag, my money, is often sought after using fast and non-repeatable methods which carry high risk rather than slow and methodical, which is the cultural norm. This manifests often as drug dealing, petty theft, breaking and entering, mugging, etc. These things can bring in cash quickly, but carry high risk and long-term aren't repeatable due to imprisonment or death. These intersect with long-term goals, which aren't sought after, but rather instant gratification. Now, the way in which mental illness is identified is only one way, and that is deviation away from societal and social norms when it comes to behavior. If X amount of norms are violated, we categorize that as a form of mental illness. Example of this, a serial killer. If a serial killer engages in behavior which is so abnormal, which they do, we put it in the mental illness category. However, if in a culture everybody was a serial killer, as the norm, they would likely believe the non serial killer was mentally ill. It isn't that in the 21st century racism is a problem, it's quite the contrary. It is simply that humans are pattern recognition machines, and if we see too many pattern deviations from the norm, we categorize that as mental illness for the purpose of our safety, regardless of culture and regardless of creed. If my opponent was walking down the street and a man was mumbling to himself, hunched over naked, and routinely stabbing himself with a thumbtack, he would immediately categorize the behavior as irregular and therefore mental illness. He would likely seek to avoid this person. And this is what happens with modern race relations. The color of the skin is seemingly less of a factor than the irregularity of behavior, which people identify immediately as otherized mental illness and avoid this set categorized group for the purpose of personal safety.
That's 5.
I'm almost done. You mind giving me just a minute or two, and I'll have plenty of time to respond? Is that
Good
fair?
with that, Austin?
Well, I mean, I've confined mine to 1 to 5 minutes. I don't know what he needs an extra 2 minutes. But he's doing
That's
exactly
fine.
what I anticipated him doing anyway.
That's fine. If you don't, I'll stick to the rules, bait, if you want to.
Yep. If you guys want to just leave it at that, then open dialogue. Go for it.
So, are you saying, Andrew, that black culture developed in a vacuum, or are you saying that centuries of slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, fatherlessness induced by incarceration, school segregation, and exclusion from asset building had no serious cultural effect? Because what you're doing is attacking the symptoms of a problem that has a root in what I said in my opening statement, which you didn't address.
I did address it.
No, you didn't.
I did. I'm saying
So
that
I'm going to repeat the question. Are you saying that black culture developed in a vacuum? Let's start there.
no culture develops in a vacuum.
Okay, then. So what created the conditions that you're citing, such as the baggy clothing, the tendency towards criminality? What created those conditions, Andrew?
Well, I'm even willing to cede that there could be disparity or an inequity or things like this, which could have contributed to creating conditionals which people move towards. But that really would have no bearing on the argument at all.
No, not willing to cede. Are you saying, if you admit that black culture did not develop in a vacuum, okay?
Yeah.
So if a government locks people out of land, housing, capital, education, and legal protection, and then later points to the dysfunction created in those conditions, that's not an argument against the existence at one point in the history of this nation of systemic racism. That's in fact evidence of its consequences. And in fact, crime is not caused by melanin. There are multiple studies conducted that's crime correlates with poverty.
Hang on real quick. Kind of. You're kind of right there. There is a correlation with poverty. There's no doubt that that's true, but that really has no bearing on the argument that I'm making. Can you steel man the argument that I'm making?
Andrew, you made an argument that black culture is toxic. What I'm asking you to do,
I didn't make that's not the argument.
Can you steel man my the three premises that I laid out in my opening statement? Can you steel man those?
Yeah, I'll steel man the entirety of your position. That due to systemic oppression, it created conditions, and those particular conditionals kept black people behind other specific groups like white people, for instance, possibly others. And what you're trying to do is create some form of equity and catch black people up, essentially, due to this disparity.
That's not a steel man of my position. Because
let's make sure I got it right.
Well, right. So I'm going to restate my three premises. One, the United States federal government caused measurable harm. Two, justice requires restitution for measurable harm. 3, therefore, the government of the United States owes restitution.
Okay, let's make sure I got them right. USA caused measurable harm. Premise 2?
Premise 2, justice requires restitution for documentable measured harm. And premise 3,
justice requires restitution. Okay.
Therefore, premise 3, the U.S. government owes restitution. And by the way, I'm not even dealing with slavery. I'm confining this specifically to Jim Crow. I'm going to leave slavery alone for this conversation.
Okay. So is the government always required to pay restitution as a moral obligation because that's what you consider justice to be? Let's make sure we got that clear.
Are they always required to do it? I'm not speaking of that. That's not a properly phrased question. I'm not going to say they're always required to do it. I'm saying that if
are they required to do it as part of justice?
if you're going to say as a part of justice within the confines of what we're speaking about, within the measurable harm that the U.S. government caused Black Americans through Jim Crow and redlining and exclusionary policies, yes, that would be part of
Okay.
justice.
And do you consider the modern government to be an extension of the same exact government that we had in the 1780s and 1790s?
If by an extension you mean the fact that the government has continued to exist, then by that definition, yes.
Okay. So even if the Constitution has changed many, many, many times, including the ideas of universal suffrage and other things like this, you still consider the modern government to be the same exact type of government as we had.
No, that is not what I said, Andrew. That's not what I said.
Okay.
Our government exists as an extension of our Constitution, which is a living document. So, and you ceded already that the
Well, what I'm
government
trying to
caused.
figure out is whether or not it is the case that even if I ceded the argument that justice requires restitution, it seems to me that in this context, the restitution would be required by the people who actually caused it, not the people who are dealing with it. Seems like the people who are dealing with it would also deserve restitution.
Andrew, that doesn't make any sense because
How
in
does
this
it not
case,
make
what we're
sense?
dealing with, I'll tell you why. Because what I'm dealing with an institution. The United States federal government is the institution in question here. The United
Yeah,
States federal government.
but is it the same government?
Let me
though?
respond in full, Andrew. I know you don't want to hear it this way. And by the way, this is not a leftist argument. I'm arguing from a conservative, actually from a conservative position and from
What's
a Christian
conservative
position.
about it, or Christian?
Well, let's start with biblically. I'm going to quote the same thing that I said to white privilege in the debate that we did on reparations. Show me anywhere in the Bible where when a party is wronged, the Bible does not advocate for restitution. In fact, when the example that I provided was Zacchaeus,
The Sermon on the Mount.
What about the Sermon on the Mount, Andrew?
Sermon on the Mount is it literally says if you were,
tell me what part.
yeah, if you're slapped in one cheek, to offer up the other cheek to be slapped. That's not the restitution. Be the
First of all,
opposite of
that's
restitution.
that's a misapplication of what Jesus was talking about, because in Jewish culture, what he was doing, he said, if a man
Talking
slaps you on
about
the cheek,
class.
turn to. When Jesus is quoting that, if you're going to quote the Lord, let's quote him in context. When he's talking about that, he's saying if a man slaps you on the cheek, turn to the other also. He's speaking about being defiant, especially in his case, in the face of injustice. So let's start, and you're dragging the conversation away from what we need to focus on. So I'm going to restate this.
Well, we're
question to you,
focusing right now on premise 2.
which is that the government. So you're ceding premise
Justice
1. The
requires
government did cause
restitution.
measurable harm. So hold on, before we go back, you are
Mhm.
ceding premise 1 that the government did cause measurable harm to Black
Well, I'm not
Americans.
ceding it right now. I'm just attacking premise 2 because it seems like it's an obvious premise.
I'm
to
asking you a
attack.
question, Andrew. Are you ceding
Yeah,
that
no,
premise
I'm
1
not
happened?
ceding it. No,
Okay, why are you not ceding it? Because
all I have to do is have one of these premises fall and the entire argument collapses.
well,
and
you
it
can't
seems like
make premise 2
2.
fall if you can't deal with premise 1. So I'm going to start back at premise 1. Did the United
Mhm.
States federal government cause measurable harm to Black Americans?
What do you consider harm to be?
Andrew, answer the question.
I can't unless you qualify what harm is.
Well, let's start with the fact that Black Americans were not treated as citizens. They were prohibited from owning homes. They were prohibited from being treated as full human beings.
Mhm.
I mean, are you just going to be this deliberately intellectually obtuse this entire debate and ignore history?
If you bring me a formal argument, don't get mad that I make you explain the words in it.
Andrew, I'm bringing you a formal argument. The argument is redlining. The argument is Jim Crow.
Hang on, stop. You brought me a 3-premised formal argument, and you're getting mad that I'm making you define
I'm not
your
mad,
terms in
Andrew.
the
I'm
argument.
holding you to task on
Then
something you
good.
don't want to
Then
be direct
describe
in
for me
answer.
what harm is.
Anything that did not allow Black Americans to gain and have full equal protection under the law, which is what the Constitution guaranteed us. The same thing that Martin Luther King said to us in the last speech that he gave in I've Been to the Mountaintop. All we're saying to America is be true to what you're saying on paper. So I'm going to ask you one more time. Did the
Mhm.
United States federal government always, and let me rephrase the question, did the United States always treat Black Americans as if they were equivalent to white Americans in this country?
Of course not. No.
Okay, then. So now you've ceded premise 1. Thank you, Andrew, for being somewhat intellectually honest.
If you're asking me about what harm is, well, I'm asking you what harm is, and you just say harm is anything which leads to bad outcomes for Black people, basically. Is that right? From the governmental level. So if it was a bad outcome,
Any government-backed policy or any
Mhm.
government-initiated policy that excluded Black people from being treated as equal citizens under the law, that is harm, Andrew.
okay. So any government-backed policy, which would you say like discriminatory, perhaps, which was discriminatory, is
I
harm?
think you're smart enough to understand that.
Yeah, again, you don't. There's no actual reason for you to be combative on me.
Not
Just
combative.
making sure that
You're
I
running
understand,
from addressing the core of my point.
bro. Just calm down. Listen to
Oh,
what I'm
I'm
saying.
calm, Andrew.
I just want to make sure that we understand the actual argument and its clarity, so that we can make sure that it's consistent with
The
what the
chat
values
understands the
are.
argument quite well. You're the one struggling with it.
Yes, of course I'm struggling with. I don't know what you mean by the words, and I'm making sure that I do.
As smart
So
as you
when
are,
you
Andrew, you
say
know
the word
exactly what I mean by the
harm,
words.
government-backed policy, which was discriminatory towards black people, correct?
Correct.
Okay, got it. So now I understand what that means. So we can move from premise one. And I'll say, yes, the government has definitely backed policy, which was discriminatory towards black people.
So you see the premise one. Thank you.
Sure. Well, now that I understand what harm means. So when we get to justice, it requires restitution. What are we defining justice as?
What I would define just so now, are you essentially asking? Let me make sure that I understand what you're asking. What would you define as justice? That way, I can properly answer the question.
Would have no bearing on anything.
That would have no bearing on anything.
Yeah.
Well, in my
You don't
world,
need to know my position to know your position, dude.
no, I'm asking. No. I didn't say I needed to know your position. I asked you
Great.
what
Then
you
just tell me
I
what
asked you-
justice means.
So this the word game. I'm going to play it with you. What would you define? How do you define
It's
justice?
not relevant. It's not my argument. It's yours. So what does justice mean?
So, okay, so Andrew, we're going to try this one more time. In this case, justice would be policies done to remove any lasting economic barriers or any lasting racial barriers that may be preventing African Americans, in this particular case, from wealth generation or the ability to maintain wealth once accumulated.
So
For
justice
example-
so justice in this context is only towards black Americans.
No, that's not the case at all. And
Then what is
within the
justice? Then what does justice mean here?
within the confines of what we're talking about, we're talking about Black Americans.
Okay, yeah. So when you say the word justice, what does that mean, dude?
What it means, I just defined what it means.
Well,
It
no, you
means-
said specifically it means
justice is
black
giving.
with-
Okay, all right. Let's try this
hang
one
on,
more time.
dude. Just let me actually answer the question. I'll let you answer it. Okay, let me ask it. Here you say justice requires restitution. That's a formal premised argument. That's premise two. All I'm asking you here is, what does justice mean? So I can make sure that I'm following the argument. You brought the formal
Justice is giving. Okay, so I'm going to respond to you now. I'm going to try this one more time. Justice is giving what is due. Within the context of this debate, I'm going to say that justice means that when a person or an institution causes measurable harm, there is a moral obligation to repair that harm to the degree that it can be reasonably repaired. Now, I'm not defining justice as equal outcome. I am not defining justice as racial revenge. I'm defining it as restitution for wrongful harm.
Okay, so justice is giving what is due. Is that correctly how you're defining justice here? Justice is giving what is due.
Define it. I'm not going to define it any further, Andrew.
Well, the problem is that doesn't give me very much clarity, because I'm still not exactly sure what you mean by the word. Justice is giving what is due, and who makes the determination of what is due?
That's where the United States, again, in this case, the United States government caused the harm. The United States government, morally, should investigate the harm caused by slavery and determine what.
Well, hang on. These are different claims. These are totally different claims.
These are not different. Andrew,
yes, those are different claims. The United States ought do a thing.
Andrew,
has nothing to do with.
You're going to ask me a question and then not give me the space to answer.
Well, it has no relevancy or bearing.
It has a lot of relevance. You're asking me a
claims.
question now. You want to run from the answer.
They're different claims, dude. You're making different claims. So when we're talking about justice is giving what is due, answer the question: who determines what is due?
So you're saying who determines what is due? Within this case, the U.S. government would be the one determining what is due via HR 40.
So the U.S. government, they're going to be the ones who determines what is due. The government determines this. All right. So when we're talking about justice, justice is giving what is due, and the U.S. government is who's doing the determining. And then by restitution, I assume you just mean like stuff or balancing or something like that.
Any things that not just stuff, Andrew. That's extremely general. By justice, I would say compensate anything that could compensate Black Americans or serve to mitigate the existing economic gap, particularly the wealth gap between Black Americans and white Americans. I would focus specifically in terms of Jim Crow. I would focus on things like redlining, undoing redlining policies, and strengthening home ownership among Black Americans specifically, because home ownership is, especially is one of the largest keys to wealth for the American middle class.
Gotcha. And then your last premise is the U.S. government owes this restitution, which is anything that could compensate Black Americans for the various injustices that you just laid out, right?
Correct.
Okay, so then obviously I don't agree with the argument at all because premise 2 and premise 3 are contradictions. If it is the case that the U.S. government is the determining factor as to what is due to you, and then you say that the U.S. government owes this because it is due to you. If the U.S. government determines that it does not owe this due to you, then it's not due to you.
Andrew, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, I'll walk you through it.
No,
The
you don't
U.S.
wanna walk me
government
through that.
determines what
Hold
is
on,
due.
if it doesn't make any sense, it's important to walk through it. So let's walk through it.
The U.S. government determines what is due to you. That is your admission of premise 2. We went through it. You said in premise 3, the U.S. government owes the restitution. But if the U.S. government is the determiner of what is due and they decide that they don't owe you restitution, then they don't, by your own logic.
There has
That's your
been
own
documented.
argument, bro.
Okay, well, Andrew, the U.S. government has acknowledged that harm was done. There was a House resolution passed a
It's
couple
not
of years ago.
relevant. They're the determiner of what is
okay,
due
Andrew,
by your
it
own
is relevant
admission.
because the U.S. House of Representatives acknowledged that slavery was a grave crime. In fact, the United Nations just acknowledged that slavery was one of the gravest crimes that occurred in human history. So that is two forms of a government recognizing the harm done by slavery.
The
So they've
government
already
is the
acknowledged
one
that-
who
that
makes
this is-
who gets to make the determination about what is due by your admission of premise 2. If that is the case, and you say the government owes you restitution, that would be P and not P if the government decides it does not.
They didn't decide that it does not, Andrew. There has been no There has been no fully.
I'm sorry.
formal
Are you getting
investigation.
restitution right now?
I'm not getting it right now.
Now,
That
then
doesn't
I
mean the
guess
harm
they've
wasn't done.
decided you don't need it, and they're the determiners.
If no
of who
investigation,
gets
well,
it.
Andrew, that
So
doesn't make any
what's
sense.
the
How
problem?
could they get? How could they? Wait a minute. Stop. Because what you're doing, this little syllogism bullshit that you want to
It's
try
your
to play
fucking
is not going to work.
syllogism.
So
What do you mean? You're going to come to me with a
Andrew,
syllogism and then say, "How dare
calm
you
down,
attack my
calm down.
syllogism?"
Andrew, calm down.
How
Relax.
dare you attack my syllogism, Andrew?
Relax, Andrew. Calm down. Calm down.
What are you talking about, bro?
Let's start from the beginning. Okay,
Uh-huh,
so calm down,
okay.
relax. You already ceded premise 1 that the U.S. government did cause measurable harm. That is an objective reality. Okay.
Well,
already
no,
ceded
what I
it.
ceded is that
No. Bullshit.
government-backed policy,
You
which is
ceded- stop.
discriminatory towards Black
Andrew,
people, if
Andrew,
that's
that's
how
not gonna
you
work.
define harm.
Fellas, we
Andrew,
got to
that's not
stop
gonna work.
talking over each
Andrew, that's
other.
not gonna
Hold on a second, Austin. So, Austin, first of all, lay it out. What do you think he ceded? And then, Andrew, you can
He
respond
ceded,
as to...
I'll tell you. When I asked him plainly, did the U.S. government cause measurable harm? I restated premise 1 twice. I said, premise 1, the government of the United States caused measurable harm. You ceded premise 1. I know you did because I asked you twice.
Yeah,
So
okay. But what did I cede? in premise
I
one?
wasn't done speaking. Calm down, relax. I know you just screwed yourself. I know, relax. It's all right. So the rest of the crap that you're saying is now downstream of the fact you have acknowledged that premise 1 did happen. So now the rest of what you're doing is attempting to create this fog of wordplay that I'm just not going for. That's what it was, Jake, to answer that. He did see premise 1.
Okay,
Andrew,
great.
Now you
So-
can respond.
Yeah, so what I ceded was, this is your syllogism, it's your argument. So when I asked for a definition of what you consider harm to be, you said in this context, harm is government-backed policy, which was discriminatory towards Black people. Follow-up question, Andrew, is it true that there was discriminatory practice towards Black people, therefore validating what you're considering harm in this aspect? I say yes. So sure, under those terms, I'll grant premise 1 as being true based on your definition of harm. However, granting premise 1 is true based on your definition of harm does nothing for the following 2 premises. Your conclusion would be unsound if each premise is not true, and each premise is not true.
Each premise is true, Andrew.
They can't be.
Correct me if
They
I'm
can't
wrong.
be true.
Hold on. So now let's assume for a second that I buy the line of logic that you're using. If
Well, there's
premise
only
1
one
is
logic.
I'm sorry, what?
There's only one logic.
No, okay. Well, I hear what you're saying. Let's assume that what you're saying is fully accurate, which is not. Did premise 1 happen? You agree that premise 1 took place. The government caused measurable harm. You agreed there.
Yes.
So if premise 1 occurred, now I'm going to ask you plainly,
Mhm.
are you saying that justice does not require the government to do anything to recompense Black Americans for objectively provable harm that was caused to
It
them?
would be
by police?
irrelevant, whatever I would consider justice to
It's
be.
not irrelevant. I'm asking you.
Why-
The reason you're
why
saying
is
it's
it
irrelevant is because
relevant?
it would force you to answer a question that you're
Yeah,
uncomfortable
why?
answering.
It's
So
okay.
I'm going to say this again.
You have an argument, dude.
Are you going
We're
to
talking
Andrew,
about your
Andrew, will you
argument
calm,
here.
Andrew, will you calm down and let me ask
Uh-huh.
you a question?
hmm
Are you saying that the United
Mhm.
States government does not owe Black Americans anything for the harm that it caused during Jim Crow?
No, I consider justice to be eating grass. That's what justice means to me. So that's my definition
So
of
if you're going to be
justice.
this intellectually full of shit, there was really no point in me accepting this debate.
Listen,
This is
what's
hilarious.
intellectually full of shit is that you need me to define your words.
I don't need Andrew. I asked
Great,
you a
then deal
question.
with
I
the
didn't ask
actual
you to define
argument.
shit.
Then deal with the argument.
I'm asking you a question. Are you uncomfortable with this?
I'm uncomfortable with you not actually dealing with
I
the
asked
argument.
you a question. You acknowledge that the government of the United States committed acts of harm via discriminatory policies to Black Americans.
Yeah.
I am now asking you a follow-up question, which is based on your acknowledgement of the truth of the first premise. Are
Mhm.
you saying that Black Americans are not owed any form of reparative justice by the United States federal government?
Yeah, I don't
I'm asking you that
consider,
question directly.
for me, for Christian ethics, no, restoration is not required in materialism.
For Christian ethics, are you a Christian?
hmm
In what world does that, when the children of Israel were slaves in Egypt, did God not give them the gold and the wealth of the Egyptians as restitution?
No,
That's a lie.
show it to me.
Sure. So when we go to the Old Testament, wait, oh damn it. This shit froze. Hold on a second.
Great time to remind everybody that
So-
we've got the Stream Elements link pinned. If anybody wants to send their questions in, they'll also be read Super Chat and Stream Elements.
So in the book of Exodus, in Genesis 15, 13, 14, God tells Abraham his descendants will be afflicted in a foreign land, but afterwards they will come out with great substance. In Exodus chapter 3, verses 21 to 22, God says Israel will leave Egypt with silver, gold, and clothing from the Egyptians. And in Exodus chapter 12, Israel asked the Egyptians for silver, gold, and clothing, and the Lord gives Israel favor in their sight. It says they spoiled the Egyptians, stripping them of their wealth, fulfilling the promise. So biblically, God did not merely liberate Israel from oppression and tell them to move on. He brought them out with substance. So
what happened? So what happened to the Egyptians?
No. No. Deal with that first.
Okay,
You said it didn't
I'll deal with
happen.
that.
I've proven to you that it
Correct.
did.
Yeah. So what happened here was a punishment which was dealt over to Egypt because they had defied the will of God.
Okay. And were they? That's not what I asked you. What I asked you was when the children of Israel were slaves in Egypt, were they not promised reparations?
No, that wasn't reparations. They
That's
defied the will
exactly
of
what
God.
it was, Andrew.
No, they defied
God
the will
didn't
as a
tell Israel, "You're
punishment.
free now. Stop complaining." He brought them out with wealth because liberation without restoration still leaves the victim carrying the cost of the oppressor's sin.
Where does it say that?
I just read it to you.
Wait, say it again.
In Genesis 15, 13, 14, God establishes the promise. And in the book of Exodus, God says Israel is going to leave Egypt with silver, gold, and clothing from the Egyptians. And if you're going to say that reparations would be a form of punishment on white America for inflicting a crime upon Black Americans, then so be it. It's a just punishment for an unjust crime. Unless you're going to say that now the Bible is wrong.
Abraham said, "Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it?" The Lord said to him, "Bring to me a heifer and a goat and a ram." Where are we at here in Genesis 15 that we're reading?
I'm sorry, what? Say that again?
Where are we at in Genesis here?
I quoted Genesis and I quoted Exodus as well.
Genesis
Andrew.
what, though?
I just gave it to you, Andrew. You're obviously not paying attention. Exodus
No, I'm
chapter 3,
just
verses
pulling
21
it
to
up.
20. Exodus, I'm giving it to you. Calm
Mhm.
down. Exodus chapter 3, verses 21 through 22, where God says Israel will leave Egypt with silver, gold,
Yeah,
and
but
clothing. from
Genesis is the reference that I'm looking for. That you
Okay,
gave me.
I gave you 3 references. Stop doing that. Stop sticking at one when I gave you 3.
But
You
I
gotta
just
follow
I'm
me.
just
Keep
want to
up.
follow one at a time. Can you give me the Genesis reference again?
Genesis chapter 15, verses 13 and 14, Andrew. Let's start there.
Okay, 13 and 14. The Lord said to him, "Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will
Black
punish
Americans
the
not enslaved and
nation.
mistreated in
I will
America?
punish the nation
Wait,
that
stop. Were Black Americans not enslaved and mistreated in America? Yes or no?
Yeah, they were.
Okay, then.
What is it? Can
Now
I
continue.
finish reading
Now
it now?
continue. Yeah, go ahead.
These are things that aren't in dispute.
We
Your
know they're in a dispute. We know.
Your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, that they will
Uh-huh.
be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish that nation, punish that nation, they serve as slaves, and afterwards they will come out with great possession. So it was a fucking punishment, bro, like I said. Anything else?
The fuck are you talking about? You are worse than Bo. You are literally worse than Bo.
Does the word punishment, what's the word we're looking for here? Punishment?
Andrew.
Mm-hmm.
You said you're a Christian earlier. I gave you a perfect example of punishment. So in this case,
punishment, not reparations, punishment.
Andrew, God punished Pharaoh and the Egyptians because they didn't do what? They didn't live up. They didn't honor the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Correct?
Not just that; they were also honoring demons.
They did not honor the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Doesn't the Bible say you should have no other gods before me? Yes or no?
That's true, but they also were idolizing demons.
It doesn't matter what else you're idolizing. Anything that replaces God is wrong. Yes or no, Andrew?
Yeah, generally speaking, yes.
Okay, then. So it doesn't matter what false gods the Egyptians were worshiping. They were not honoring the one God that actually created the universe. Okay?
Yeah.
All right.
Great.
So now, moving along, when in the book of Exodus, chapter 3, verses 21 and 22, God says Israel will leave Egypt with silver, gold, and clothing from the Egyptians. In Exodus chapter 12, verses 35 and 36, Israel then asked the Egyptians for silver, gold, and clothing, and the Lord gives Israel favor in this sight. And the King James Bible actually says they spoiled the Egyptians, meaning that they did strip them of their wealth. The reason that the Israelites got the wealth was because the Egyptians did something morally wrong.
And God was punishing them.
Correct. So in the confines of what we're talking about, you could argue, if you wish, that reparations or some sort of governmental corrective action is a punishment on white America for a sin that they committed against blacks.
Great. I'm glad that we finally got there.
Okay. So you're saying that that's not, but you said that's not in line with Christian ethics.
That's correct. It would not be in line with Christian ethics.
How is an example that proves what I'm saying is correct not in line with Christian ethics?
Because you're citing the Old Testament, sir.
Is the New Testament, are you telling me the New Testament and the Old Testament conflict?
Well, it's not conflict.
Now that's a biblical contradiction.
It's on a continuity. But in the New Testament,
wait a minute. The New Testament is not a continuity of the Old
Testament. Austin, you have to let him get the point out before you interrupt. All right, make sure that there's equal speaking time. You are interrupting a lot. So Andrew, get the point out.
So just one last question. Are you saying
where were we? He wasn't finished.
You're just gish galloping because you're getting blown out on each point, like you just did on the one on punishment.
You ain't blown out shit,
bro. You got done telling me no, it wasn't a form of punishment. Now you've conceded it's a form of punishment. It's hilarious. But now back to this on continuity. This is even funnier to me. If you look at the book of Acts, you'll find in the book of Acts that how they determine who is a Christian is by 3 criteria. Right? You no longer have to get circumcised, for instance. Is that contradictory because the Old Testament does say that you need to be circumcised? No, of course not. It's on a continuity. And so the New Testament has a new covenant with it. And with that is the fulfillment of the law. Jesus Christ came and fulfilled the law. Part of how he fulfilled the law is by conquering death. He conquered death. And in his testament to his apostles, he taught us through Christian ethics how we are to treat each other going forward. That's why, for instance, in Leviticus, how do you deal with homosexuals in Leviticus? You wrap a millstone around their neck and you throw them into the water and then they sink to the bottom and drown. However, we don't deal with homosexuals like that in Christianity, do we? Why? Because in the continuity, you'll find in the New Testament, Christ came and fulfilled the law and gave us what the law is supposed to be.
So you're saying that the Old Testament no longer applies
No, it does apply, and the law applies. However, the law is a continuum. It's on a continuity. Jesus Christ came and fulfilled the law by conquering death, and he gave Christians the methodology for which to have their ethical system.
So we know restitution carries into the New Testament because when Zacchaeus encountered Christ, he did not say, well, Jesus fulfilled the law, so therefore I owe no one anything. He says, if I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fourfold. And Christ responds to him when he says, this day is salvation come to this house. So this restitution thing carries over into the New Testament, unless you're not going to deny that.
Read the rest of the context.
What do you mean the rest? I just read it. Matthew
Read.
5:17. Let's
Yeah.
start with and
Okay.
this is the thing, Andrew. Hold
We
on.
can do that. We can do this all
Andrew,
day, bro.
stop. You wanted me to shut up and let you respond. Calm down, relax. Christ fulfilling the law does not mean justice died at the cross. It means that Christ fulfilled the law's ultimate redemptive purpose, but the moral principles revealed in the law, which is justice, mercy, restitution, truth, and righteousness, are not abolished. Which is why I go to Matthew 5:17. Jesus says, "Think not that I am come to destroy the law of the prophets. I'm not come to destroy or to fulfill." So if this idea of continuity somehow changing the principle of the matter, which is what we're discussing, that's a logically inconsistent
The
argument.
Declaration counters the misconception that Jesus intended to discard Jewish law. That was not the
Jesus discarded
intention.
Jewish law. You're not
So
addressing
when we're
what I'm saying,
talking
Andrew.
about the distinction here between reparations and punishment, we demonstrated in Genesis under Christian ethics, we found that God was punishing the Egyptians for how they were mistreating his servants. Not that he was giving them restitution or reparations, but he was punishing those who had misgivings towards him, and he had prophesied that he would do so as a punishment, which is exactly what you want to do right now. You want to offer up a punishment for things I never did, things that you never experienced.
Andrew,
It's
I
a
don't care what
punishment.
you did. See, now you did exactly where I was trying to lead you, because you think this is about what you did. No, you already, again, going back to the start of this argument, you ceded premise one, which is that the United States government, which is still in a currently existing institution, caused measurable, documentable economic harm to Black Americans. That is a fact.
Mhm.
So therefore, the institution, which is still currently existing, the U.S. government is still around. The Constitution is still the supreme law of the land. This is not about blaming white people. This is about
I
blaming.
didn't say it's about blaming
institution.
white people.
Andrew, I didn't say what you said. I'm simply making a point. It's called rhetorical. The point that I'm making is that the U.S. government, which still exists, caused documented, measurable harm to Black Americans. Because the
Right.
government caused this harm, they
That's the
should be
premise
held.
that's where we get
They
in the
are held.
problem with the premise.
Can you allow me to finish?
Yeah, but that's where the premise goes wrong, is in premise 2.
It doesn't go wrong in premise 2. If you
It
can,
does.
you have given no definition of justice. You have
I
given
don't need
no
to. It's not
refutation
my
of my
argument.
definition of justice either, by the way.
It's not my argument. It's your argument. You're the one arguing. You're on the pro side here. The pro side is saying that the U.S. government makes a determination of what restitution is due. And then your third premise negates that by saying that the government itself owes restitution. That can't be the case if the
How can it
government's
not be the case when the government
because
is the
if
one
the
that caused the
government's
harm?
not paying
Biblically,
out,
it would be the case.
because if the government's not paying out restitution, then the government has determined it doesn't owe any.
So biblically, going again to this example of Zacchaeus, Zacchaeus said if he harmed any person, he restored them fourfold. In this case, the U.S. government is Zacchaeus. The U.S. government caused measurable, documented harm to Black Americans. Therefore, they would be the one to owe restitution to the harmed class.
Well, I'm not sure that we're talking about the same thing here. So from your view, the government is the determining factor of what they owe by your own premise.
Andrew,
of
what you're
premise
doing is so
2.
damn exhausting, it's ridiculous, because your inability to be
I
intellectually
know,
honest.
using your own words against you is
You're
tough,
not
I
using
know.
my own words against me, Andrew. You're not even addressing my words.
Okay, justice
you started
requires
this debate.
restitution, premise 2. Those are your words.
Andrew, you started this debate by acknowledging that the U.S. government caused harm. You are attempting to now skirt around the definition of and create some sort of pseudo definition of justice, or rather, not provide one.
I'm
because
using
you're
your
disagreeing with mine.
it's your
And I've
argument.
asked
Why
you
do I have
again.
to provide you your argument, dude? I don't get
Andrew,
it.
Andrew,
Andrew,
you-
I need you to define justice for me, for my
I
argument.
already did
Why?
it. It wasn't good enough for you, so I'm going to ask you
Not that
again.
it's not good enough. I'm just telling you your argument
Andrew, okay,
is
so
unsound.
let me ask you.
What do
so
you
let
want me to
ask
say?
you
It's
then.
an unsound
So let me
argument.
ask you then. Let me ask you
Mhm.
then. What would you define justice as? If you have an issue with my definition, now I'm trying to expand the conversation as best as possible. What would you define justice as, Andrew?
Why do I need to give you a
Your
definition?
inability. Stop being like Destiny and directly answer the question. If you can do that, we can continue the conversation.
I'll tell you what. I'll see the entire debate right now if you can tell me why it's required that I give you a definition for justice when you gave me the syllogism.
I gave you a definition for justice that you claimed was not in line with Christian ethics.
No,
That's why I'm now
I
asking
said
you
that
to
your
answer
syllogism
the
is
question
unsound.
Andrew, you asked me to answer the question. I answered it.
You haven't answered
So
it.
I gave you the
Why is there a
definition.
requirement that I define the word
It's not a
justice for your syllogism?
Andrew, if you're gonna sit here and play this word tap dancing bullshit, there is no point in me continuing this conversation.
Well, then
I am
leave.
asking you
If you're going to
plainly.
cry about it, if you're going to cry about your
I'm not
argument
crying
getting
about it. I'm
decimated,
holding
then
you to
leave.
task.
Then
All right,
cry.
fellas, just
Cry
quickly,
about it.
let me try and get
argument's
this.
being
Let me
destroyed.
try and get this back on track. So, it's gone a little. It's flip flopped a little bit from the Christian ethical argument to the more constitutional argument that we're going from like a constitutional government argument to is this ethically Christian. Austin, because you do have the affirmative claim, it's that's why your position is getting investigated a little bit more here. But do you want to make the argument from the constitutional lens or from the Christian lens?
I'm making the argument from the Christian lens. I'm making from
the
both
Christian
of those
lens.
lenses. I'm making the argument because the point is you can't separate America from Christianity because in the Declaration our America was founded under the principle that all men are created equal and that all men are made in the image of God. That is that's objectively provable. That's objectively verifiable. So you can't.
Okay.
There's an intersectionality that exists between the Constitution and Christianity. That's
Well, you
irrefutable.
have a
So,
problem.
I wasn't done speaking, Andrew.
Okay.
So
When are you-
based
when are you
around
actually gonna
that,
be done speaking.
what I'm asking you to do is because again you're playing the word game, and I know what you're doing. So I'm asking you. I gave you the
Directly
definition
engaging
of
with your
justice.
argument. Go ahead.
I gave you the definition of justice.
Yes, you did.
You are saying you stated when I provided the definition, you stated that does not line up with Christian ethics. I am now asking you because when you say that, what you're implying is that you have a superior definition that is more in line with objective Christian ethics.
That would be
So I'm
incorrect.
now asking you to define
Yeah.
it. If you can't define it, then
Because so understand, you said justice is giving what is due. That's your definition. I can say that does not line up with Christian ethics based on the fact that it's giving what is due. An example of this: you're a Christian, yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Do you believe in the concept of forgiveness?
yes,
What does a person have to give you to be forgiven?
they don't have to give me anything.
Okay. Well, then
Within that
your
context, the
idea
context
of
forgiveness of sin, that's a
your
completely different.
your idea here then of restitution for the idea of a harm has befallen you by somebody else for you to forgive them requires no restitution. You're pointing out that Christian ethics requires no restitution for forgiveness.
The reason that I'm able to forgive, we're talking about two different things. You're talking about forgiveness of sin, which is not what we're discussing. So what you're saying doesn't line up. So
Well, then
again, this is where we're
how
going
do
back
you
to the
define
word game
harm
of
absent
you're
sin?
running from answering a core question
No,
because in
I'll
order for
answer
you to
that.
do that,
Look, I'll show you. When you say the word harm here, the reason that you're saying that these are unjust, government-backed policies which are discriminatory towards black people, I'm assuming that means that you consider these things unjust under a Christian ethical purview, which is what you just argued. If that's the case, then you're saying, look, harm here is some violation of Christian ethics, right? If that's the case, if it's a violation of Christian ethics, but the core of your ethical principles, the idea of forgiveness, and forgiveness requires no restitution, nor are you allowed to seek vengeance, then I don't see how you have an argument here for restitution at all.
what
from the
you're
purview
doing,
of
and
Christian
this
ethics.
is amazing because you call yourself a Christian, and yet I gave you an example in the book of Acts where Zacchaeus says, or excuse me, the Gospel of Matthew, where Zacchaeus says, and even in the book of Acts as well, where it was stated that if someone harmed someone, they would restore them fourfold. So and
Does that
it is
mean
also
that-
a Christian. Wait a minute, it is also
Okay.
a Christian. It is also in line with Christian ethics that faith without works is dead. So if you when you look at, and again, you're trying to muddy the waters, and I know what you're doing. I'm not Naima. This is not the whatever podcast.
Yeah, they
so
make way better arguments.
you're not going to, well, that's up for debate. You're not going to run from this. You have given no definition of justice while calling yourself a Christian, while contesting my definition. So your inability to answer the question really exposes the flaw or the deliberate flaw in the logic that you're attempting to skirt away from and use. So I'm going to ask you one more time. If you're willing to acknowledge that the government of the United States caused measurable harm to black
I'm sorry, real quick.
How
I
can
had
you
my-
then say?
Well, hang on. My internet dropped for just a second. So can you go back about 15 seconds? Sorry.
If you already ceded at the very start of this debate that the
Mhm.
government of the United States caused measurable economic harm, you're in agreement with my worldview of Christian ethics already. You're seeding that you're acknowledging right there that you're seeing the world through the same lens that I am from a Christian-based lens.
No, that's not
Then
established.
you're it's okay. So now no, you're not. So what do you define as now harm, Andrew? Because now
Well,
you're changing your
when you
statement because
create
you first granted premise one.
when you create well, no. I didn't say I don't grant premise one.
No, I
I
said you
said
did.
that
First, you
the
said you did grant it. Now
granting
you're
the
not granting.
granting of premise one would have no bearing on whether or not we're now looking at it through a lens of Christian ethics. For instance, it could be utilitarian ethic that we're looking at. Utility, if you understand Bentham and his philosophies, as a utilitarian, you would be looking at a harm principle as under the form of utils, which just means
I
negative
asked you
versus
were you looking at
positive
it under Christian
outcomes.
ethics, Andrew. Now you're giving me some other shit that doesn't matter.
No, I'm explaining to you that this would not premise one would not establish that this is now Christian ethics. What would
How do you view
establish?
the world, Andrew?
Well, I do from my worldview through Christian
Okay,
ethics.
then. So that means we're discussing the same worldview. So stop the
Well,
intellectual tap
no,
dancing
that
and answer
doesn't
the question.
it doesn't mean. Hang on, just because I view the world through Christian ethics
Both of the debaters view the world the same.
does not mean that premise one establishes that we're talking about Christian ethics yet. This
Yes,
is
it
why I'm
does.
very, very clear on language, so I can make sure that we're talking about Christian ethics because
Andrew,
we
if
seem to
both
have
of
a
us,
hang on, we seem to have
if
a
both of us view the
contradiction.
world
Hang
from
on,
Christian ethics,
hang on. We seem to have a contradiction here.
it's
The
not a contradiction.
contradiction, P and not P. If forgiveness, from your view and my view, requires no restitution, even if we both point out that there's demonstrable harm which had occurred, why would that demonstrable harm which had occurred require restitution for forgiveness? Well, it wouldn't. That's the contradiction.
I'm not speaking of Andrew. You're speaking about forgiveness as if that within the Christian lens, forgiveness is given to us if we accept Christ as a savior. We're not talking about forgiving the United States of America right now. We're talking about whether or not the U.S. government caused documented harm to Black Americans, which
Yeah, but that's been
admitted that they
established.
did. Well, hold on. You admitted that they did. You
Yeah,
admitted
that's
it.
established.
So
Nobody's
if that's established,
disputing that.
now you're sitting here arguing about what is justice, which all you're
Yeah.
doing is muddying the waters by trying to avoid answering the question. You still right now at the 51-minute mark of this debate,
Mhm.
you have not answered the question of what are you trying to define as justice?
I don't need to define justice. It's irrelevant. I'm
It's
not the
not
one
irrelevant,
who's
Andrew.
I'm not the
It's not
one.
irrelevant.
Listen, so that
If
you
you're saying that
understand.
my
Stop.
definition
Let me
is not in
respond.
line with
Let me
Christian ethics,
respond. Let
that
me
would mean that by
respond.
definition yours somehow is.
No,
But
that
you
wouldn't.
refuse to
It wouldn't mean
define it.
that. God. Listen,
Andrew, yes. Why is it irrelevant? Let's hear that.
let me explain this so that you understand. Right? I'm gonna speak real slow and real soft. So, if you make an argument based on your worldview, that's your position. Your position is the one of change. You're the one who's proposing that we do something about X. That's your position, not mine. I'm not proposing that we do anything about X.
Still not answering
I'm
my question.
asking you why ought we do something
You're
about
still not
X?
answering my question.
Yes, I am.
No, you're
I'm
not.
asking you why ought
I
we
asked you what is
do-
your definition of
I'm
justice, and you're
asking
refusing
you
to
why
answer it.
why is that a requirement? Tell me why it's required that
It
I
is
tell you your position.
you are. I've restated this shit 4 times. You said that my definition of justice is not in line with Christian ethics. I am now asking you, based on
No,
what you're saying.
I'm saying that when
Andrew,
if you
stop.
bro,
What
do you
you
want the
are
answer or
saying-
not? This is
What
crazy.
you are saying is that if my definition, your premise is now Austin's
Mhm.
definition of Christian ethic or definition of justice is not in line with Christian ethics. While claiming yourself to be a Christian, I am now
Mhm.
simply asking you to define within your lens of what you call Christian ethics, what are you defining as justice? You
Yeah.
claiming that it is irrelevant does not.
All right, let's
further the
let him answer the
conversation,
question.
and it is a
Andrew, do
escape
you
hatch from answering the question?
Andrew, do you deny that? Do you deny that you are
All I
saying
need
that
to
his
do
definition of
to
justice is not in
negate-
line with Christian
all I
ethics?
need to do to negate the claim is justice is giving what is due is a Christian principle. I would never have to give a counterclaim of what I consider justice to be. So it would be irrelevant to your proposition and your premise. You want me to defend your premise or
No,
come up
I
with some
do not.
stop, bro, stop, my turn. Or come up with some sort of counter syllogism for you.
I don't give a damn
Now,
about a counter
just hang
syllogism. I'm
on,
asking
dude.
you
Just
for a
let me
definition
finish. Can I
that
at
you're
least
refusing to
finish?
define.
Can I finish the point? Right?
Can you answer the question?
Yeah, I don't have to ever give you a definition of justice for your syllogism, bro. What do you want me to say? Do you know logic? Can you tell me the 3 laws of logic, dude? Just tell me the 3 laws of logic.
Andrew, I am going to restate this one final time,
Oh,
because
please
what you are
do.
doing is muddying the waters, and I'm going to recenter this debate for the last time. And if you simply refuse to do this, if you simply refuse to answer the
Mm-hmm. Then you're
question, what
going to
I'm
run
going to do
away
is
and not defend your syllogism.
I'm not going to run away. Andrew, you are nobody to run away from, son. What I'm telling you is,
Mhm.
you are calling yourself a Christian. We have established that we both, based on what we've stated, view the world through a Christian-based lens.
Yeah.
You are now claiming, so we've set a baseline, we've set a conversational foundation.
Yeah.
You are claiming that the definition of justice that I provided is not in line with biblical Christian ethics, while
Yeah.
yourself holding the same foundational worldview. So
Mhm.
I'm simply asking you to define in your worldview, what are you saying is justice? That way we can have a clear we can determine if
Mhm.
we have a clear operating baseline of what justice is and
Yeah,
premise
but
to.
the problem with this is that when you say justice, you gave me a principle. The principle is giving what is due. That's your definition of justice. I can deny and denote that the principle does not align with Christian ethics without ever needing to give you some definition of justice. It's irrelevant.
That doesn't make any sense.
Okay,
That
tell
would
me how it
only
doesn't make
hold if
sense.
you were not claiming yourself to be a Christian, because what you're claiming
What?
is what you're doing is claiming a sort of mental, not even mental. You're claiming a form of definitional superiority by saying that my definition is not in line with Christian ethics, while refusing at the very same time
Not
to
the
provide what you
definition.
would
I'm talking
claim is a
about the
better
principle.
definition.
Yeah, I'm talking about the principle. You assigned a principle to justice as the entirety of the word justice. I'm willing to cede that that is your principle. Justice is giving what is due. But what I'm doing is applying justice is giving what is due to Christian ethics, and I'm finding that I don't see that principle anywhere.
And you're refusing to identify how you don't see the principle
All
Because
right,
you're
I
not
think we
providing a
probably
definition of Christian
we
ethics.
probably should move the
There's no
debate on,
examples
guys.
of it. What do you want me to say?
Let's move
What do you want me to
the
do?
debate on, guys.
We just wasted 20 minutes on this shit.
Guys. Let's just move the debate on. There's a few different angles that we could take it. We could take it from the how did these systemic injustices occur? Is it culture? What plays more of a part in that? Andrew, you made those claims in your opening statement. We can go down that line. We can go down what is systemic racism? Does systemic racism still exist today? Where would you guys like to take it? Because this definition stuff's getting a bit long.
What was it? What you said? The systemic racism still exists today? No, I don't think. I don't believe, and I said that in my opening statement. All things are not due to systemic racism, and today, racism in America is largely, I would argue, on its deathbed. There are the lasting vestiges of systemic racism are too small. The ones that do exist, they're too small to negate any sort of legitimate mobile upward movement for Black Americans. So I wouldn't have a line of thought there, a line of disagreement.
So
All
it's
right.
not, so currently in modernity, you're saying you don't believe that systemic racism is much of a thing.
I don't believe that it is as much of a upward mobile deterrent as it was in the 60s and prior under the Jim Crow era. No.
Okay, so then would you agree with me when I'm expressing the cultural deficiencies, and the cultural deficiencies being primarily the result for why many Black Americans currently find themselves unsuccessful?
You could argue
Not due to systemic racism, but due to cultural filters which are self-imposed.
You could argue that yes, today largely a lot of those issues are culturally imposed, but the origin of those, which we discussed in the opening of this debate, is the root issue of that. There's always been a high net positive correlation between poverty and criminality, which is what we discussed earlier. But today, Black culture has become,
But
and
that
this
doesn't account for the disproportionality.
I'm sorry.
It doesn't account for the disproportionality.
What doesn't account for the disproportionality?
Poverty.
No, it doesn't. Not individually, but poverty compounded with the exclusionary practices practiced by the government, put into place by the government. I've said quite often that.
Then what would explain the disproportionality absent the systemic racism now?
I'm sorry?
Then what would explain the disproportionality if there's no systemic racism now, but you still see disproportional amounts of criminality?
Because
based
we
on
adopted bad habits
poverty.
and kept them going. I mean, that's the answer. This is where I lean heavily into conservatism. I mean, into my
So it's
conservatism. We have
self-imposed.
Yeah,
due to culture.
now it's self-imposed. Yeah, I've said that plenty of times.
Okay, so if it's self-imposed due to culture and not due to systemic racism, there's a disproportionality. Is that justice to the culture which is subsidizing the culture which refuses to be successful.
Who is subsidizing black culture? Are you saying that white America is subsidizing black culture?
No, I'm saying that the American government, which you're holding to these sins, is subsidizing black culture.
The American government is subsidized. Let me make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. You're saying that today the American government is currently subsidizing black culture.
Yes.
Through what metrics?
Well, we could look at multiple metrics. The first would be DEI. That would be a good metric to look at for subsidization. Another one is that the government
How is that when
spends.
white
Hang
women
on,
also made up? Wait a minute. Hold on. Black people. Wait a
Let me
minute.
give you the list real quick so that you
Well,
have.
hold on, but let's start with DEI for a second because
Okay.
only 3% of black people black people only made up 3% of all DEI hires, Andrew. The largest benefactor of DEI has been proven to be white women, so that's a lie.
So let's back up real quick.
No,
What about
address that point first.
Yeah, let's start with per capita. Do you agree with me that there's way more white women than there are black women?
Yes, but that does not, again.
So why don't we?
overall-
So
wait
can
a
you
minute,
tell
wait
me
a
what
minute,
the numbers
Andrew.
are
Let me
per
answer that in
capita?
full. Let me answer that in full.
Okay.
Based on multiple studies that have been released by the U.S. Department of Labor and multiple studies that have been conducted for DEI, the largest benefactor of all DEI platforms or programs was white women.
And per capita, which is the number that actually matters.
Are you saying that per capita and white farmers too? Yes, as well. White women and white farmers. Yeah. Per capita, I don't have those numbers right in front of me, but I mean that's a simple Google search. I mean, it's not like we're not sitting right in front of our computers.
Yeah. So then look it up.
So you're saying is per capita, who's the largest benefactor of DEI?
Yeah.
Okay, so per capita, who's the largest benefactor of DEI programs?
Per capita. Yeah.
Okay. White women, veterans, people with disabilities, and various racial and ethnic minority groups, depending on the program.
And what programs?
It's varied. It varies. There's no universally accepted national ranking across all DEI programs, but the evidence from employment and educational affirmative action suggests that white women have often been among the largest beneficiaries of diversity and affirmative action policies per capita.
And now what about black women versus black men?
But that's race internal. That doesn't matter.
Why does that not matter?
Because we're looking at what we're looking at. You said that the government subsidized black people,
Mm-hmm.
but what we just looked up proved that the largest benefactor, even per capita, is still white women. So now what you're asking is another question.
I'm actually not sure on the per capita. I'm not finding the actual per capita answer. What you gave me seems to line up specifically with the proportionality, or specifically when you say the most amount of DEI hires are white women. I can concede that that's true, but I actually can't find the per capita disproportionality.
There's no universally accepted number, Andrew. I just quoted that.
Yeah, so
I didn't make that up. I just read it.
So that's the problem, right? It's like black women are only 6% of the population, 7% of the population. So you would expect that white women would be the ones who would get the most amount of
Andrew,
DEI hires.
Andrew,
how is it terrible?
How? Because you're literally now running from acknowledging that what you said was not logically consistent.
How is it not logically consistent?
You said the U.S. government subsidizes black folks, when if that's true, nationally speaking, they should still outperform white people in DEI programs, and they don't.
They do.
Okay. Under what source, Andrew? Provide the source, because now you're making the positive claim. So where's your source?
So it's not just DEI when you're talking about subsidies, which is why you cut me off before I could give you my list. So when we're talking about subsidization for black people, we'd also be taking into account school. We would be taking into account direct payments when it came to welfare, when it came to all
the largest recipients of welfare are white people.
Let's do per capita. Let's do per capita.
Let's do per capita. Per capita, who is the largest recipient of welfare payments between black Americans and white Americans, or black Americans and all Americans? Which one you want?
Either.
Both. Sure. If you're asking total dollars received per capita, white Americans receive the largest amount of welfare benefits because
we're not talking about
total
dollars.
Stop.
We're talking about total people.
I'm answering the question, Andrew. I'm answering it in full. Relax.
Okay.
Historically, Black Americans have had higher participation than white Americans in programs such as SNAP, SNAP, which is food assistance, TANF, which is cash assistance and Medicaid. White Americans, because of their larger population, often receive the largest total amount of benefits still across many programs. When you include programs also heavily used by the elderly, such as Social Security and Medicare, white Americans per capita receive the largest share of total benefits because they still do make up a larger share of the older population. So
Black people per capita receive more SNAP
Andrew,
benefits.
are you listening?
Read the part.
It's still white people.
No, it's not.
I just read it to
Read
you.
it
Andrew,
again because you don't understand what you just read. Read it again.
I'm not reading it again. You
Then
don't
I'll read it
understand.
for
You
you.
obviously didn't listen. You obviously your ears ain't working. So
Yeah. So here.
All
I'll
right,
just
let's
read
get
it for you.
it from the other side now. Go on.
On a per capita basis, Black Americans participate in means-tested welfare programs such as SNAP, food assistance, TANF, Medicaid at higher rates than white Americans. Now, let me read that for you again, sir. On a per capita basis, Black Americans participate in means-tested welfare programs such as SNAP, food stamps, TANF, and Medicaid at higher rates than white Americans. What are you confused about? Anything?
not confused
Are you
about anything.
confused, sir?
Well, I'm not confused about anything, brother. What I'm trying to get you to see is that even what you're saying. Wait a minute. That's still so. Wait a minute. So you're saying that welfare is a form of a government is a government subsidy, and that is that a form of reparations to you?
It's a subsidization.
That's not what I asked you.
Yeah. So if we're tying it back to my earlier argument, I'm saying that if it's the case that the government is subsidizing Black people at a higher rate, then what's happening is the government has no money. They're taking money from one group and giving it to another. So how this works in real
taking money from you act like Black people don't pay taxes. So what are you talking about?
I'm trying to explain to you how this works in real time. So if it's the case you're going to vote for somebody, you only vote based on generally two criteria. It's either I'm going to take less from you or I'm going to give something to you from somebody else because the government has no resources. You're the resource. You are born with a Social Security number, and your Social Security number is what the government bets against before it begins to incur debt, things like this, because they're betting that you're going to pay X amount of taxation. So that's literally how the system works in,
So you're
in
saying
perpetuity.
that a system that Black people pay into because Black people are taxpayers just like everyone else, and funding for welfare comes from the American taxpayer. You're saying that that essentially Black people subsidize themselves when you break it down. That's what.
No, they're not subsidizing themselves. They're being subsidized by a different group of the population because the government itself can't offer any subsidies. They're only offering money from one group to another. So when you think about it, the government's not the one providing reparations or even the subsidization. It's white Americans and other general working class Americans who are providing that subsidization for Blacks. So I feel like based on your argument, if that's the case and justice requires giving what is due, then Black America should give back to the group which is being taken from, which subsidizes.
So you're telling me that Black Americans should give back to white Americans?
Mm-hmm. If we want to follow your ideals of justice, yes.
That's not my ideal of justice. So my ideal of justice is that Black Americans shouldn't have to, based on what you're saying, for at least the next 60 years, Black Americans should have to give white Americans shit because Black Americans were systematically subjugated from wealth creation by by a white government that was in power that kept us from owning homes or wealth generation.
But I thought you just said that I'm not responsible for that, and you're not responsible for that.
I said the government. I didn't say you, son.
Yeah, great. But right now, there is a responsibility for the people who are alive for injustices which are happening. And if justice is giving to a person what is due them, then what is due to whites
what definition of
from
justice
the Black community? Yours.
Well, now I'm going to ask you what definition of justice.
I'm using yours. Your definition is justice requires.
How is anything due to white Americans when they've had an economic advantage?
I'm trying to explain it to you. I'm going to explain it to you, right? Whether or not. I can't explain it to you. No. Okay.
No. Who has had an economic advantage in this country for a longer period of time? White or Black Americans?
White Americans.
All right, then. So what you're saying literally makes no fucking sense.
It does. It makes perfect sense. If it's the case that there is no current systemic racism by your own admission, which is keeping down the Black man, but rather social habits, which are imperfect when it comes to society, and so society doesn't want to deal with them based on those social habits, then it would be the case that right now I'm simply being punished for the bad social habits of other people, and you're disproportionately taking wealth from me to give it to those people, which would confine with your
Andrew,
idea.
no one is
Stop, bro.
disproportionately
Let me make the
taking anything.
argument. Let
No
me make
one
Yeah,
the
is
let's hear the
argument.
argument. Let's hear the
disproportionately
argument.
taking
You
anything from
won't
white
even respond to the
Hear the
argument
argument
because you won't even let
before.
me say it. So again, your argument of justice, right? Justice requires restitution. That's your exact premise. Okay. And then when we talk about what that is, what is justice? It's giving what is due. So here's what is due. What is due if it's the case that it's not systemic racism or biases which are causing blacks to have this situation in modernity, but rather bad social habits, which you agree to, then it would have to be the case necessarily that they're disproportionately taking from me, which
The
means
bad
I'm due
social
some
habits that black
justice.
people have,
I'm
the
due
bad
justice, bro.
the bad social habits that black people have more directly impact us race internally than they impact white Americans. So what are black people taking from white America, Andrew?
They're disproportionately taking money from the taxpayer in order to
They
give it
all
to their
pay
social
taxes. What are
group.
you talking about?
But they are
Black people pay
disproportionate.
taxes the same as white
But they
Americans. So what you're saying
receive
doesn't
this.
make any sense.
They're
It doesn't even
receiving
logically follow.
disproportionately. They're receiving disproportionately. So give me what is
That's
due
not
because that is
true.
what's just.
That's not what's just.
I
That is
literally
that is
just
the great,
wrote, here's
that
what's
is the
true.
single stupidest thing I've
Black
ever heard in my life.
Americans participate in
Andrew,
means-tested welfare
Andrew,
programs,
stop. Andrew,
SNAP,
wait a
food
minute. Andrew,
stamps,
Let him make the argument.
Medicaid, everything at disproportional rates in comparison to white people. White people are also paying more into those systems than black people are. It's disproportional that way as well. Therefore, if it's the case that we're following your code of justice, which is to give what is due, right? And justice demands reparations, then
you're
you
forgetting
need
the
to
first
give-
premise of that
stop,
argument.
then stop, bro. Then
No, you're
black
forgetting the
people
first
would
premise of that
have
argument.
to correct this injustice by giving to whites what is their due.
Andrew, you can't use premise 2 of my argument while neglecting premise 1, which is in this case, did black Americans cause any lasting economic harm for 200 plus years to white Americans?
Well, the
Yes or no,
time
Andrew?
the time the
No.
no,
Yes or no?
no.
Right.
But
Okay, then. So what you're saying, it doesn't make any sense.
but why would it matter if it
Thank
was
you,
30
Andrew.
years?
Thank
Why
you.
would it matter if it was 200 or 30 years?
Andrew, you already answered the question. That follow-up does nothing.
Why would it
What-
matter if it
e-
was
e- even if
200
it-
or 30
even
years?
if we confine it, even if we go back and confine it to the era of Jim Crow, did black Americans create any legal barrier for full economic participation for white Americans at any point in American history?
Yes.
What legal barrier did black Americans create
Well,
that prevented white Americans from
They're
full
receiving
economic participation?
disproportionate benefits
That is not
in
a legal
comparison to
barrier
what
that
they're
was
giving.
created. Let me restate the question because you
Uh-huh.
might have missed it.
Mhm.
What
Yeah, but I'm talking
legal
about the
barrier
idea
did
of
black
justice.
Americans? What legal barrier
Mhm.
did black Americans
That
create?
has no
for white
bearing on the
Americans?
argument.
It has a lot of bearing on the argument.
No, it
because
doesn't.
My
If
initial
we
premise was
if
that the
we
U.S.
look
government caused
yeah,
lasting economic harm to black
correct.
Americans.
So
So
if
it
you're
does have a legal
so if
barrier,
we're talking
which
about
you choose to try to conveniently ignore, but I won't allow you to do it.
Okay, great. Am I allowed to respond now or no? Okay, great.
Oh, please.
So
I'm waiting for an actually
great. So when we're looking at premise one, USA caused measurable harm. Now you say that means government-backed policy, which was discriminatory towards black people. How do I know? Because I wrote it down to make sure that we had it clear. If that's the case, then all we have to do for the USA to cause measurable harm to white people is say that the government has backed policy, which was discriminatory towards white people. If it's the case that they're taking more from white people to disproportionately compensate black people, I consider that said policy discriminatory. And then under your views of justice, which require restitution, and justice is giving what is due, it would now be black priority to give reparations to white people to correct this injustice by your own logic, sir.
No, it would not be.
Yes, it would. I just walked you through your own logical syllogism.
What you're saying, this is just fucking hilarious. The reason
so
that black
too.
people even have a conversation around reparations the reparations conversation would not exist if the U.S. federal government had not committed acts of measurable economic harm to black Americans. Let's start with that. Especially if we confine it, because at the start of this debate, I said, well, I wouldn't even address slavery because of the length of time that has elapsed. Black Americans did not dominate the socio-economic and political structure of the country for the same length of time that white Americans did, especially if we're just confining it to the past 60 years or the Jim Crow era, excuse me. And so there's no way that you could make that argument logically consistent because white Americans are the ones.
Yes, I can. I'll
that
show you
voted
how.
for these white Americans are the ones that voted for the very programs that you're talking about. So what you're saying is that now they should owe that to themselves, which is, again, is not logically consistent, but that's the net end of the logic you're using.
No, it's not, and I'll explain again. So if we look at federal income taxes specifically, Asian Americans pay the most in federal income taxes per capita. Next is white Americans. They pay the most in per capita. Then Hispanics, and last is black, which means that blacks are disproportionately taking more than their fair share of benefits out of the system. If that is the case, then that's a discriminatory policy because you're taking from one group to give to another group, which violates the foundation of the very same principles of the nation you're talking about. So if we follow your syllogism, justice is giving what is due. That's one. And before that, we have the requirement of what justice even is. The U.S. government is the one who determines this, right? The USA caused measurable harm against government, and what measurable harm is government-backed policy, which is discriminatory towards black people. Okay, I'll just invert it. Discriminatory towards white people. If this
Andrew,
is the case,
no
then white
evidence that
people
you could
deserve, whites and
no
Asians
evidence
deserve
that you could give
reparations.
the government is discriminatory towards white Americans when white Americans dominate the political power structure of this country. Unless you're going to make the argument that white people are somehow discriminatory against themselves, which would be stupid to say, that doesn't make any logical sense.
How does that not make logical sense? I don't understand.
Because why would what you're saying implies that
why
white
would the key
America
of
would
justice
discriminate
be
against
required?
itself?
Yeah, why would the key of justice here be a requirement that even if whites proposed an injustice and blacks were the beneficiary of said injustice, say similar to how Andrew must now pay for the injustice of people that he was not responsible for, why would the racial demographic of that matter in order to promote justice? Justice here being your syllogism.
What you're talking about that's not justice, Andrew. You're just what
justice
you're doing,
is giving what's due, sir.
What is you haven't identified what is owed except to say that because white people spend more money on entitlement programs for black Americans, which again is that's not historically the case. It's not historically provable.
It is
unless
historically
you're provable. Unless you're now trying to avoid the per capita argument and now focus on national, which is a very slick way of trying to make yourself correct. That does nothing to.
You mean the thing that matters the most, which is per capita? That's how we break down everything.
So now you're saying that per capita, black Americans receive the most, but because white Americans pay the most, white Americans are owed something.
Per
That's
capita,
not logically consistent.
Per capita,
that doesn't make
per capita. White
sense.
Americans pay not the most, the second most. Asians pay the most. So if it's
so, then by your logic, Asians Americans should get reparations from somebody
after we get them from black people. Yes. Then we could pay up whatever the disproportionality was to the poor Asians.
That line of logic has to be the stupidest shit I have ever heard.
Well, that's a nice assertion, but not a refutation.
Andrew, I already refuted it. The fact of the matter is you are literally saying something that falls on its face. There is no point in American history where any economic harm was caused to white Americans by black Americans.
I'm
None.
giving it a yes for the last.
No, you're not giving anything. You're talking about the amount of money spent on
again.
entitlement programs when black Americans have not even had fully equivalent rights in this country, nor full equivalent economic participation, but since around 1973.
Okay,
so we haven't even had full economic participation for the
so
same length of time as white Americans. So what you're saying doesn't make any sense.
So we can measure at least for 42 years, since I was born in 84, that for 42 years, it has at least since then been disproportionate that black Americans have disproportionately taken
42 years versus 244.
More out of the system. No, hang on. I'm just talking about our lifetime.
Wait. For 42 years. See now you're confining history. Black Americans have been at an economic disadvantage for 244 years.
Yes, but
now you're talking about
The problem with your logic,
so what you're saying doesn't mean anything, Andrew.
It does, because the problem with your logic is you say in modernity, and probably at least since the 80s as well, that blacks have self-imposed limitations. It's not due to anything systemic. So if it's self-imposed limitations,
within the confines of culture, yes.
Do you want me to make the argument or not?
No, because you're not going to change what I'm saying. I'm saying that within the confines of culture, black Americans have a cultural issue, but the root of the cultural issue can be traced back to decade after decade of systemic injustice visited upon black Americans by the United States federal government.
And
you want to confine something to 42 years within the last 244, black Americans have not had full equivalent economic participation.
Yeah, but they do now, and they have for at least 42 years.
42 years does not negate lasting net negative desperate impact that lasted for 244, Andrew.
Yeah,
and you should know that as well as I do.
But this is all under governments that I didn't participate in. Therefore, I couldn't be responsible for the justice aspect of this.
Okay, again, You just because I'm not talking about whether or not you participated in it as an individual. The government of the United States conducted acts of measurable harm against a specific class of people. So the
Yes.
lasting effect of negative policy can be
Mhm.
felt generations after the
The
fact. Do
problem
you
is,
agree?
though, is that if
Do
it's
you
the
agree with the
case,
statement that
yeah,
that a economic action can have lasting generational effects? Yes or
sure,
no?
sure.
Okay, then. So you're literally agreeing
That
with
doesn't
my
help
argument
your
in real
no, it
time.
doesn't
Thank you.
actually help your argument. I'll explain why.
No,
So when you're
it
talking
solidifies.
about, I'll even use your very same argument. When you're saying that there's economic impacts which can be felt generationally, this would be the exact same case of the economic impact which is felt generationally from the disproportionate amount of money which is given to Black Americans from me personally.
How
You
much money have
didn't.
you personally
You
given to
didn't
Black
even.
Americans, Andrew?
You would cry if you saw how much I paid in taxes. So anyway,
I
the
didn't
thing
say
is,
pay taxes. You said
yeah.
you just implied that you gave Black Americans money personally. So how much money have you personally contributed to Black Americans?
Well, I'm talking about through the tax system.
Uh-uh.
That's the
How much?
basis of
No,
my
I'm
argument.
quoting the words you just used. How
Mhm.
much money have you personally given Black Americans?
Um, I don't know, like through charity, you mean, or
You said it. Don't know. I'm not defining or saving you from the shit that just came out of your mouth. How much money have you directly given Black Americans?
I'm talking in context of taxation.
Now you're talking in context of taxation.
I always would. That's the whole context of this. Is
Right. No,
that's my
first
whole
first it
argument
was entitlement
revolves around
programs. Now it's
taxation.
taxation. Okay.
Yeah, my whole argument
When I
revolves around
said that
taxation.
Black Americans pay taxes the same as white folks, that wasn't
They
good
don't
enough for you.
though.
But now
They
you
don't
get
pay
to
the same.
you know
They don't
get to
pay
muddy
the
the
same.
waters there.
That's just
cheap.
not true though, because they don't. So the thing that's funny here is like when we're talking about the idea of justice, somehow it's unjust for there to be economic impacts which Black people had to deal with for 200 years, but somehow it's okay and just that I will have to deal with the economic impacts of this for 50. It's like
Andrew,
how
one
are
of
these
the
things?
parties in this
Hang on,
conversation, what you're
man.
negating to acknowledge,
All
is
you
that one of the
do, all
parties
you
in
do
this
is
conversation.
filibuster before I can even make the argument. Remember how I'm letting you make your arguments? Just let me do the same thing. So what I'm saying to you is pretty easy. If it's the case that there's lasting economic impacts and that is an unjust, then right now I'm experiencing something which is an injustice by your own metric. And that is that the
You're
economic
not by my
impact of
own
my
metric, though. That's not true.
yeah, it is, and I'm going to demonstrate it. Right now, it is the case that disproportionately, I'm part of a group which pays way more in taxes and subsidies than it's receiving, as opposed to the group that's taking. So, if that's the case, an injustice is being perpetrated against me, and by your own syllogism, justice is due me. Therefore, what should be happening here is justice, which is me getting what's my due, should be Blacks not disproportionately taking out of that registrar that's coming in from whites. Simple.
Andrew, that is not the case, because when you look at the length of time that Black Americans and white Americans have held equivalent political and economic and socioeconomic power, white Americans have held larger sums of power for longer spans of time. So your issue for the last 42 years could not be with Black Americans, because Black Americans, by comparison, are historically underrepresented in our government as opposed to white Americans. So your issue could never be with Black people, because
Wait,
Black people did not create. Yep, you wanted me to finish.
Uh-huh.
Who wrote the tax code in this country?
Politicians and NGOs.
The color of the skin of the most dominant class happens to be who? Whites or blacks?
NGOs. Probably
no. Of elected officials that wrote the
yeah.
tax code that we possess, who wrote it?
The tax code
Majority
that we
whites or
possess
majority blacks?
wasn't written by politicians, though.
Majority whites or majority blacks wrote the tax code of this country? Answer that.
They were majority probably Jewish, I would say.
Were they black or non-black, Andrew?
Non-black.
Okay, then. So what you're saying, you have no argument with Black Americans. The tax code that you're fussing about was not written by Black Americans, period.
And the tax code that you're fussing about that held Black people down was
I'm
not
not.
written,
No, I didn't say the
was
tax
not
code
written
held us
by
down.
me,
I said the
right?
United States federal government
And was that
committed acts
written?
of measurable,
Yeah,
documented harm
and
that
those are different. Those
have
are different
had
governments,
lasting
and now you want
negative
to
impact.
perpetuate. Hang on. Now you want. I just answered your question in good faith. So now answer mine.
No, you didn't answer in good faith. You ran from answering it directly.
I literally
I had to
answered.
narrow it
Whites.
down for you so you
Ready,
could get as
whites.
specific
Yes,
as possible.
that's me answering. Whites, sure, yeah.
Thank you.
But how would it be the
Finally
case?
being intellectually honest?
How would that be the case? But I was. I answered it. So now answer my question with the same yes or no, like I've been doing for you. You ready for this? When we're talking about injustice, would it be okay for an injustice to be perpetrated on me in order to solve an injustice that you believe was perpetrated on a different group?
No.
No. So then if that's the case, I just demonstrated to you how there's right now an injustice being perpetrated against my group, but yet you don't care about that, even though the only way for your group to get justice would be to penalize my group.
No,
Demonstrate
it would be to penalize the
this.
United States federal government.
And where do they get their
The
money?
House of Representatives
Where do they get their money?
released a House resolution, and I believe it was December of 2023.
Where do they
that
get their money,
acknowledged that
dude?
slavery- Excuse
Where
me?
does the government get its money?
The government gets its money from the taxpayers, but the government would have
who's
to.
the second
The
largest
problem
group
is
of
the problem is, Andrew,
taxpayers?
what you're doing is you're running from acknowledging the fact that regardless of the fact that you were born in 84 and the night I was born in 95, you're refusing to acknowledge that the U.S. federal government would if we wanted to be just and if we wanted to call ourselves a Christian nation, they would owe some form of restitution to Black Americans. Your brand of Christianity is absolutely amazing because it's not in line with biblical ethics at all, objectively. It's just, I mean, it's frankly not. That's what I've found from this debate, and I'm quite frankly disgusted by the way you attempt to represent.
Oh
Christianity.
yeah. Oh my pearls. Oh my pearls. Oh my
Well,
pearls.
I don't wear
Oh,
pearls.
my
I don't wear
pearls.
pearls. I prefer 18 karat gold. But
Great.
you know, I'm disgusted by the way you attempt to
Did you
represent.
grab your
Christianity.
gold chain and tug it? I don't know. It's like
No.
if you
Gold
prefer
bars or
18
coins.
karat gold, I don't know. But here's what's funny is like none of these are negations to the argument. Where does the federal government get its money from, dude?
From multiple various sources.
What's the primary source?
Taxation and revenue.
Taxation and revenue. And the second largest group of people who are being taxed and pay the most into those taxes is white people. So all you're really asking is for a redistribution of wealth from Hispanics, whites, and Asians to blacks. That's what you're asking for. And so
That's
what
not what I'm
ends up,
asking for,
so what
Andrew.
you're
It's not what
doing
I'm
is
asking for at all.
you're creating an injustice, which is the
That's
very
not
same
creating an
injustice. Stop,
injustice.
bro. Just let me make the fucking argument. So what you're doing is you're creating injustice by your own metric. Because what you're doing is you're taking from one group to give to the other. Therefore, that group says, well, you have to give me what is due me, which is the money that you stole from me.
How did we? Well, Andrew, you're. How much money was stolen from? Okay, see, if you say that, when you say that, my question now boils down to this: how much free labor was extracted from Black Americans during Jim Crow and during slavery?
I mean, it's incalculable.
Oh, okay. Well, no, it's not incalculable because Dr. Sandy Darity wrote a book on this called From Here to Equality, and he
Those are just
calculated
rough estimates, though.
I mean, obviously, okay. I mean, rough estimates, but
It's really, really high.
it's really, really fucking high.
Mhm.
So how the hell can you say that Black Americans owe white America anything when the amount of free
Mhm.
labor that was extracted, you just said was incalculable? What you just
Because
refuted yourself right
because
there.
you just said that in order to have justice, you cannot do an unjust thing to a group in order to compensate for an injustice done against another group. It would be an
You just said
injustice by
there
it
is
being
no
hang
number.
on, it would be an injustice by your metric to take from my group in order to thus compensate your group for an injustice done to you. Simple.
Andrew, you literally just said
Mhm.
that it is incalculable the amount of
Yes.
money, the amount of free labor that was extracted from
Yeah,
Black Americans.
incalculable.
So what you're saying,
Probably
there is
way
no
higher
way
than
in hell.
all
There
estimates.
is no way in hell. There is
Mhm.
no way in hell that
Yeah.
Black Americans would owe white America any form of reparations when the
Well, that
amount of free
doesn't
labor that was
follow.
extracted is
That doesn't
incalculable.
follow.
You just
That
proved your
doesn't
point.
follow.
You just proved my point and refuted yourself in the hour.
That
27
doesn't
minutes.
follow, dude, because even if it
It
is the
does
case,
follow. You don't want
no,
to
it
acknowledge
doesn't.
that because now
I'm
you realize how
going
stupid you
Bro,
sound. But it
I'll
does
explain
follow.
it in an argument form again. Even if it were the case that the federal government extracted billions or trillions of dollars unjustly in unpaid labor from Black Americans, which I would agree is true, especially during the slavery days. I can't even tell you how much, right? I've seen estimates that are extremely high, and I think that all estimates are likely wrong because the amount of labor was actually incredible in human capital. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But even if I grant this as being true, if it is the case under Christian ethics and your form of justice that it would be unjust to take from one group in order to compensate for another, when you're actually asking the federal government to make these compensations, but the federal government only gets its revenue from taxpayers, then what you're actually asking is that we pay the price for the sins of people who we didn't even exist at the time. You're asking for a separate injustice. So you can't ask for
Not
an
asking for a separate
injustice. You can't
injustice.
ask
If
for an
you're- if you're-
injustice where
because
you
what you're
spend
doing
the money
is,
of other people who pay into
what
the
you're
system
doing
in
is
order to
remaining
benefit
intellectually
another
obtuse,
people
which I
group.
didn't expect you to be this intellectually obtuse because you cannot deny, and this is going to be my closing statement because I do have a
Oh, now you got to go.
Well,
Before you had
no,
all
we're
the
gonna
time
get
in the
no, we're
world.
gonna
when
get.
you
I'm gonna stay for
started.
the. I'm gonna stay for the super chats, but for a minute.
If you guys
But I
do
do-
want to do that, then Austin,
Had all the
because you
time in the
started, then
world when we
you'll
started.
get the last word. So if you want to move into super chats now, then Andrew will go first and you'll go second.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you want to move into closing statements, that is. Andrew?
Yeah.
Oh, you want me to go first? Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
you go
that's
first.
fair. That way he gets the last word. So this was bizarre because my debate opponent actually came with a formal syllogism, which is crazy because unless you have those really thought out, like those are really easy to destroy in a debate. I wouldn't do that in the future unless you like start studying philosophy or something. But essentially, here's how his syllogism went. His syllogism was, did the U.S. government cause measurable harm towards Black people? That was under premise one, government-backed policy, which is discriminatory towards Black people. Did it happen? I concede that this happened. That was never an issue for the concession, only what we considered harm to be, so that we had that fleshed out. He said that justice required restitution, but that was contrary actually to him claiming that he was a Christian ethicist, because we got to the root core of what Christianity is, which was forgiveness. I asked him if restitution is due forgiveness. He says no. Well, then that's P and not P. So if forgiveness is the ultimate form of justice, then that would be a P and not P proposition. He said justice is giving what is due. That was the main form there. Well, if that's the case, if justice is just giving what is due, then that means that any wrong which is perceived towards me is unjust, and therefore I deserve to have what's due me. So he also says in premise three, the U.S. government owes restitution, but also negated that claim with premise two when he said the government actually determines what restitution is. So if that's the case and the government has determined it owes no restitution, then his own premises conflict as P and not P again. So that's three contradictions so far. The fourth contradiction that we get into is when we're talking about, again, his idea of justice. When we're trying to measure these ideas of, can you do something unjust to me in order to compensate for an injustice which was done to you in the past? My opponent's answer is no, of course not. That would be against the violation of the very ethics that he follows. Fair enough. So we dive into who pays the most in taxes, as the federal government themselves has no revenue. They only collect revenue. Turns out that it's Asian Americans, white Americans, Hispanic Americans, and only lastly, Black Americans, which means that disproportionately they would be taking wealth from other groups in order to give it to themselves or have it dispersed to them, which would create this new form of injustice. In fact, by his own words, he says, can the government make policy which has lasting economic impacts on a single group? My concession is, of course they can. But that's exactly what he's proposing here. And then to make matters worse, he didn't seem to understand what per capita meant. He lied outright and said that per capita, it is the case that white people paid more in social programs. That was completely not, that Blacks and whites paid about the same roughly, and that whites were actually the ones who were getting the most out of these social programs. That was a complete lie. We broke it down per capita. Same thing with taxpayers per capita. Of course, it's whites who pay the most in. So over and over and over again is contradiction after contradiction after contradiction. And he also bizarrely demanded that I continuously give him definitions for his own argument. And yet he has the positive position. He's the one who's the architect of change. I want to see this thing change. Now, if I came in with a proposition of Christian nationalism, I would fully expect my opponent to say, define your terms and what is it that you're proposing so that we can at least check the consistency. His own proposition negates itself immediately. He also lied to you when it came to, and this was early on in the debate, just outright lied and said, no, this is restitution. I said, no, that was a form of punishment, actually, against the Egyptians. No, it wasn't. He pulls up a bunch of Bible verses, and when he read Genesis, he purposely left out the word punishment, which is just amazing. Purposely left it out until I had to point it out. No, this was a form of punishment, not restitution for violating God's law. So it's like, it's just wild to me. I think we could have maybe had a productive conversation back and forth on these, but he brought a formal argument. What do you want me to do? If you bring a formal argument to a debate, I'm going to engage in it. So with that, I'll yield the floor, and I did appreciate the debate.
All right, Austin, up to you now, man. We're going to read out super chats after this, guys. Just a heads up, we'll be going from most to least. So we'll start with the highest ones and then get down. We'll be reading out all the 20s, but we'll see how we go with the others. On to you, Austin.
I mean, Andrew did exactly what I anticipated he would do. He turned this into a sophist debate instead of an actual discussion. I think that he exercised a lot of the same nonsensical tactics that I've seen him do in other debates. He claims to be a Christian and yet wants to selectively apply when Christianity is useful and when it is not. Even citing to him the example of that, yes, it is punishment, but it was also reparations, which was my chief argument when God gave the gold of the Egyptians and the silver of the Egyptians and the wealth of the Egyptians to the children of Israel. Andrew gave no refutation or no additional definition to the term justice, yet wanted to spend about 45 minutes of my time that I will never get back trying to play word games and debate about what justice means, yet not provide a definition for one himself, because in order for him to do that, he would actually have to have a legitimate conversation, but that was not Andrew's intent. His intent was to avoid losing, and so he engaged in debating like a sophist instead of actually having a discussion. He could not refute at all the idea. He granted, we won if I wanted to, I'll say this in closing. The debate was won the second that he acknowledged that the U.S. government committed acts of harm that lasted for generations with premise one. He then spent the rest of the debate trying to say, well, yes, the government did harm Black Americans, but just because harm took place doesn't mean that we owe restitution. No true Christian can hold those two things in conjunction. And so my argument still stands. If harm is done, restitution is owed. Black people still have not gotten a legitimate form of restitution in the same way that Japanese Americans got when they were paid by the U.S. government $80,000 after they were illegally interned in internment camps. The U.S. government still spends about $32 billion a year on Native Americans and Black Americans, who generated the most, as Andrew said, an incalculable amount of wealth for this nation, have gotten nothing back as a form of recompense. Andrew cannot refute that. And so the net of it is, I came in this debate to do what I did, which is to tell the truth. And Andrew ran from the truth while I tried to tell it. And that's about it.
All right, guys. The first one coming in from Brandalorian saying, Austin, would your plan include reparations to blacks who came to America post-slavery and post-segregation? And would your plan make whites who came to America post-slavery and post-segregation? If not, how would you stop it from being abused?
Very simple. You make people prove that they're a descendant of slaves, or that they were alive and had family members in the United States during the Jim Crow era. My plan would not extend to anybody that did not live or in America post-slavery, or that, people that came to America post-slavery, or whites that came post-slavery. I mean, that's a very simple one. My reparations plan would be confined to the actual descendants, the provable descendants of American slaves, and the provable descendants of those that were alive during the Jim Crow era.
All right. Red Fox says, did your syllogism apply to white people? If so, are whites owed reparations for the Civil War, Great Depression, or any other government-failed policies?
White Americans were not treated as property in this nation for 200 plus years, so no.
Red Fox says, Austin, why do you compare harm between whites and blacks in the USA, but not between blacks in the USA and Africans where they came from? Who is better off today?
Because not between blacks in the USA and Africans where they came, because one has nothing to do with the other. Martin Luther King Jr. himself said in his last book, Where Do We Go From Here, which was published in 1967, that the American Negro is not an African. He is a true and authentic hybrid. He is a combination of multiple cultures. That's why I wouldn't compare it. Who's better off today? I would absolutely say that in spite of America's horrendous history, African Americans that are alive on this continent and in this country today are better off than Africans overseas.
Blink for 20 says, Austin, you'd be more effective at this if you weren't getting so emotional when having your position challenged. You can't handle pushback. Now observe what happens within yourself when you heard this read to you.
Nothing happened within myself. I don't mind pushback. I'm a professional debater.
Relian says, for 20, Christianity doesn't promote punishing the son for the sins of the father. Please tell me, Austin, why should the government of today and its citizens suffer for the sins of our forefathers?
No individual should suffer, but the government has to acknowledge that the lasting effects of economic policy can have impacts that last generations.
But the government cannot give to one group without taking from another. It's not even possible.
Well, if the U.S. government had never taken free labor from Black Americans, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
But that doesn't negate the principle which is applied.
I'm not saying it negates the principle. The U.S. government would be simply paying a debt that's owed, whomever they have to take from. We're all Americans. Well, it's not like this is the thing about reparations. It's not like that money wouldn't go right back into the U.S. economy. That's the part that always makes me laugh. The one thing that Black Americans are the number one consumer in this country, particularly Black women. So if Black people were cut any degree of a check, which I'm not a fan of, by the way, I'm not a fan of a reparations check. My plan would be more specifically targeted towards home ownership and things of that nature. That money would simply go right back into the U.S. economy. Look at how quickly Black Americans spent their stimulus checks.
Yeah, and then what happens with the COVID-19? It leads to massive inflation due to the fact that they printed huge amounts of money and gave it to people, and we're still paying for that inflation to this day, and that's why
Yeah,
some
I
of the
don't think
prices
that
are so much higher.
like I just said,
So
I
all
agree
your
with you
plan would
there.
do well, both plans would inflate the economy. There's no
Well, no,
ifs,
I
ands, or
don't
buts.
disagree. That's why I'm not a fan of cutting a large check. That would create
No, but
hyperinflation.
any
That
plan
it
that
could
you
be
have
measured
would
if you
create
measured it
inflation.
out. If you created a plan where you gave measured, I'll say measured economic injections and measured steps to lower inflation. But my plan would also, Andrew, to
No,
be
it
honest with you,
necessarily is going to increase
my plan would
inflation,
also
bro.
involve re-examining the U.S. dollar to try to reattach it to the gold standard before we try to do any of this, because the U.S. dollar's lost 97.6% of its purchasing power since the Federal Reserve has been in existence. So I
That's
would,
not
before I did
that's
any
not
of this.
because of gold, dude.
What do you mean it's not because of gold?
It's not because of gold. It's just
No, I didn't say it. No. I'm not saying it's because of. I'm saying we were taken off the gold standard in 1933 when
71.
FDR signed Executive Order 6102, and since that time, the U.S. Federal Reserve has drastically, rapidly increased the money supply, and I mean,
But your
you look at
plan's
that,
going to increase the money supply no matter what.
not necessarily.
There's not then there's
I haven't
no
even
it's
crafted the plan in full, Andrew.
any plan which either offers subsidies or direct payments is going to create inflation, because if you add any market value to something and you begin to pump into that value, it's going to increase the supply. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. That
Which is why I
inflates
would
it.
want to re-examine the entire U.S. money supply before doing anything of the sort to mitigate that problem that you just described.
Yeah, that wouldn't mitigate it. No matter what, you're going to
It would
inflate it,
slow the rate of inflation, Andrew.
but it's still going to cause inflation.
Inflation is inevitable at this point. We have a fiat currency. Inflation is built into the system. That's
Inflation
a
is not
non-sequitur.
inevitable because you have a fiat currency. That's ridiculous.
Okay, Andrew, then explain to me why the U.S. dollar has lost 97% of its purchasing power since the Fed's been here.
Well, because of money printing, but that's it's not a necessary cause of it being fiat, because you don't have to print the money because you can, dude. It's not necessary. You can
Okay,
have a
Andrew,
fiat
but you
currency.
just admitted.
You can
Okay, wait a
pay.
minute.
Hang on.
So
You can
money
pay your
printing.
entire. Bro, just listen to me. You can have money printing capabilities and not print a ton of money. It's not necessary. It depends on what your payouts are, your GDP, and your entitlements. Entitlement spending is the largest spending that we do in the United States, and secondarily is military spending. You don't have to inflate
I
the
don't
money
disagree.
supply just
Andrew.
because it's fiat. You don't
I
have
don't
to.
disagree, but historically, what you're saying is valid. You don't have to, but historically, this is what has happened, and inflation skyrocketed the minute we were taken off of the gold standard because that
Inflation
limits
was
the amount of
skyrocketing even before that. Even on the gold standard, there's inflation. The problem with it, all you're talking about with the money supply is a contraction or an addition to. And the more you add
Andrew,
to it, the more it inflates. And the more you contract from it, the more valuable it becomes, like every other resource.
Andrew, if we had a gold standard, there's a limited amount of gold in the world, period. So if we had a gold standard that places a definitive cap on how much money we could print to begin with.
It doesn't.
Like what you're saying is okay, all right. I mean, that's not historically true, but okay, Andrew.
No, it doesn't. It would just up values, and then you would take fractions of the gold. That's it. That's what has always traditionally
You still
been
could
done.
print but so much money, Andrew.
No, you
If
could
that's the
still
case,
print.
why are we taking off the gold standard?
If you were to, like, here, I'll demonstrate it to you.
Wait, answer that first. If that doesn't, if the gold standard doesn't,
Because of Keynesian economics and the idea that you need to bail out certain industries if they get too far behind or it'll collapse your GDP. That's why. But the point is here
so
is
you
that
just all right.
the point is here is that if you have a gold standard and you attach a greenback to it or a dollar to it, let's say, the dollar's worth this amount of gold, you could still fraction off the gold as infinitely in order to create more dollars against those fractions. Do you understand that?
I get that, but what I said
what are
was
you
that there's
talking
still
about?
there's still a net limit of the amount of money that could be produced based around the amount of gold in the
No,
system.
there's not. That
All
would
right,
make,
Andrew.
bro, you just negated your own point.
I
If it's
didn't negate it.
if you can make infinite
Andrew,
fractions,
you're talking about. All right,
oh,
this
man.
is
If
a
you could
nonsense.
make infinite fractions for a gold coin, right? This is worth 0.0.01 of a gold coin. Whatever value you attach to that, you can continue fractionally into infinity.
All right. Well, Blaine Pasashik came in and said, question for Austin, have you forgiven your mother or your father?
Forgiving them for what?
It's a Jesse Lee. You never seen Jesse Lee Peterson's interviews where he asked them if they've forgiven their mother?
No, I don't watch Jesse Lee Peterson.
Oh, it's pretty funny. Jacob says, the son shall not suffer for the iniquity of the father, nor the father suffer for the iniquity of the son. Ezekiel 8:18 and 20. Seamer 98 for 20 says, I blame Jake for this man getting a beat down from Andrew. WAWL Jake. That wasn't very nice. Blink. Yeah, I know. I'm getting L's. Blink says for 20, the ancient Jewish and therefore Christian understanding of justice has to do with things being made into the way they're supposed to be. Austin's understanding of justice would mean that God would have to kill everyone.
Essentially, that is true if it's what's due you. If you believe that we're in a fallen state, then what's due us is death. But Jesus came to conquer that fallen state, conquer death, right? That's the whole point. So the whole negation here for Christian ethics has been bizarre to me, but maybe we just have a foundational distinction in how we view Christian ethics.
We clearly have a foundational distinction on how we view Christian ethics.
What denomination are you?
Non-denominational.
Then I think I do understand your position well.
What denomination
Nicole,
are you, Andrew?
I'm an Orthodox Christian.
Nicole Michelle sent a donation as well, supporting the stream over on Stream Elements there, which is pinned in the chat if you guys wanted to send something over there. The great Andrew Thrasher came in and said, good evening, Mr. Rattlesnake. Former senior airman Andrew Thrasher here. Another ignorant leftist trying to rewrite historical facts. WT people have been enslaved all over the world for thousands of years. Stop crying, not one step back.
Yeah, I'm not sure, Mr. Thrasher, that would negate his argument. His argument, it makes sense until you get into the actual argument itself. I didn't want to muddy the argument up by bringing up white slavery or this type of thing, but just engage with the argument as presented.
Matty Fresh says for 20, at its peak, only 1.4% of US population owned slaves and only concentrated in half of the states. How in the world is this idea of reparations fair when those who didn't even own slaves owe money to those that never were slaves?
It's not about people, it's about the government institution.
That has no money and has to take necessarily from one group to give to another. That you're just creating a different caste system immediately of people who have injustice, who are being dealt to
Imperfect
them.
humans should have never created a caste system to begin with in the United States of America.
Well, but I can grant this with you granting my position as well. It wouldn't matter if it's the case that we both agree that that system is unjust. For you to say that we should do injustice now in order to compensate for the injustice,
wouldn't be injustice; it'd be restoration in my view, in using my brand of Christian ethics.
It can't be restoration if you're taking it from unwilling participants to give it to willing participants. That's not.
When Black Americans weren't willing to come over here on the Nina and the Pinta and the Santa Maria. That doesn't. What you're saying has no value to me.
It has complete value. I'm agreeing with you that that's unjust, and so you would agree with me that the same thing applied in modernity would be unjust. That's the point.
No, I would not agree with you there, Andrew.
Well, then you have a P not P position. It's a contradiction.
Chaw says, your entire argument reduces to it doesn't violate Christian ethics to give reparations because we'll just launder it through a third party. That is the most bizarre argument I've ever heard.
That's not my argument. Who the hell said laundering money? Who the hell said that?
Well, you're using the government as an institution of force to take money from one group to give it to another group. You're using force to do this. as
Well,
a
force was used to extract free labor, so I see that as an eye for an eye.
Well, eye for an eye is not a Christian principle.
You sure about that?
I'm 100% positive.
Well, I think the Old Testament would disagree with you there.
The Old Testament, an eye for an eye, and the renewal of the law is negated by Jesus Christ. He renewed. He gave us renewal. We don't deal with
Gave us
things like
renewal,
this.
Andrew, but that still doesn't mean that that an eye for an eye is still not a biblical.
Oh, really? So if you come in and you grape my wife, can I go grape your wife?
No,
that's
you
eye
can
for an
kill the
eye?
person that raped your wife, though.
That's well, okay, but wait a second. That's not eye for an eye then. You're looking at a different form of justice than eye for an eye. Eye for an eye justice was actually you pluck out my eye, I pluck out yours. Any injustice you do to me, I'm now justified in doing back to you. That's what eye for an eye is.
We have a fundamental disagreement there that is not worth getting into, Andrew.
Okay.
FB says, by that logic, the institutions and leftist activists pushing racial division over reparations too. They helped create this toxic culture, spent hundreds of millions promoting it, and contributed to negative societal decay.
That's actually kind of funny.
The J.E. Kitchen says the first official slave owner in the U.S. was a black man named Anthony Johnson. You going to tell him his descendants to pay up?
Yeah. Slavery is a moral evil. The fuck?
And his descendants who had nothing to do with this moral evil should pay for it.
Not his okay, that was a bit of a sarcasm. But I don't care who owned. I don't care if the first person who owned a slave was a black man. The institution of slavery, especially slavery based on skin color in this country, was just pure evil. Period.
Bill James says for 20, acting like slavery wasn't the norm for all of time until the 1700s and ended by white men around the world, then acting like they owe you something is the most ridiculous shit.
It is true that it was the Western European nations which first moved abolition, and they're the most punished for it. Western Christian nations who shrugged off slavery before all other nations are the most punished for having done it, though they were the least culpable for doing it.
Yeah, but they're also, but you also said these are the Western Christians also claimed. Judge Tanner also said that the black man has no rights that he's a white man is bound to respect. While being so Dred Scott was free, but was still seen as property, a thing to be used, not a person to be respected. So that's still bullshit.
Oh, well, hang on. I agree with this in principle, but still the reforms which came out of Christian ethics and Enlightenment principles for the specific term of slavery, and I mentioned this before, the Western nations did it before all other Eastern nations did.
I don't disagree with that, Andrew.
And they are the most punished group for having done that, for admitting wrongdoing, whereas in the rest of the world, slavery is still an SOP, a standard operating procedure. And if you look at the transatlantic between the Pacific slave trade, it's not even close. What the Arabs, you ever wonder why there's not very many black Arabs, even though they took way more black slaves? It's because they castrated them. That's what they did. They castrated them. They killed them off. That's why there's very few black Arabs and there's lots of black Americans. And that's
The
because
fact of the matter is,
we didn't do that.
One form of tyranny in America was substituted for a new form of tyranny.
Yeah, but that's what your proposal does. It gives us the
No,
same
it's
exact.
not what my
It gives us
proposal
the
does,
same
Andrew.
thing.
It seeks to mitigate a currently existing gap in wealth.
Yeah, but that's
largely due to government-backed policies that disenfranchise Black Americans.
But those are equity policies, and they're never ending. Then you could say the same thing about soldiers,
Mines would
for
end.
instance. What's that?
Mines would have an end date. I don't believe in perpetual victimhood.
Yeah,
I would
but
have a sunset provision for everything that I'm proposing.
Why can't Native Americans make the same claims, or why can't this group then make?
They could make the same claim.
Yeah, exactly.
They could make the same claim. The U.S. government is paying $32 billion to Native Americans.
But that's
every year,
that's the leftist trap. The leftist trap is the second you make the employment of equity based, especially on intersectionalism, which is what that would become. It becomes never ending. It's a never ending cycle. Every group can then come for grievance.
I don't want this misstated. I am not a leftist. I am vastly far from that.
I'm not saying that you are.
Everyone, a lot of the left would have a problem with the fact that I don't believe that every program that I would work to institute would have a sunset provision that would not last for more than 30 or 40 years.
Yeah, listen, I understand this, but if the second you introduce an idea of reparations, meaning grievances from the past, which disproportionately affect one group over another, every group could then come to make those claims, and it's an infinite amount of grievances. That's the whole idea behind equity and intersectionality to begin with. And it is left-wing thinking, not conservative thinking. That is factual.
All right, fellas. Well, we've got a lot to get through here, so I'll try and blast through them as quick as possible. Tiffany says, you don't want to punish current citizens for the sins of the past, yet the current government is funded by the current citizens. This makes no sense. Big W for Andrew. Johnny says, both, considering what we know through history, American history, and the current state for Black Americans. Was bringing slaves from America on ships a net positive or net negative for the Black society comparatively all around the world?
So let's see. Let me think about the question. What we know through American history and the current state for Black Americans was bringing slaves from Africa on the so Black Americans are definitely in a better position than they would be if they had stayed in Africa. And absent colonization in Africa, Blacks are in a better position due to the colonization in modernity as well. So I don't even know how that's argued, but that's not what my opponent's arguing. He's not arguing whether or not the conditionals for Black Americans are vastly improved in comparison to Africa. He literally said that he believes that that's the case. And then I'm assuming the same thing with colonization. So
anything on that, Austin?
Was bringing slaves from Africa on ships a net positive or net negative comparatively? I mean, when you look at the broad scope of I would have to actually agree with Andrew here that if you're going to make the claim that throughout the broad sweep of history, it was the Protestant Christians that fought for the end of slavery, then I would say that unfortunately, while it's a horrendous way to come to the country, it was a net positive.
Alpha Genesis for 20 says, Austin needs to stop quoting MLK. He was a heretic and a commie. MLK believed that the only way to free the black man is to pay him. Personally, I am free through my faith in Jesus, whom MLK rejected was God. Foolishness.
That's a lie. Martin Luther King only rejected the gospel when he was in college. He recounts an experience when he was there's two experiences he recounts where he became a Christian. One of them was during the Montgomery bus boycott, and the other was when he was stabbed with a letter opener in the 1950s. He did deny the Christian faith very early in his life. That's indisputable. You can read his college papers for that. But prior to Dr. King's death, he was in fact a Christian. I actually had a conversation with Andrew Young about when King was in fact at the Lorraine Motel. He said he vividly recalled Dr. King on his knees praying just before he went out to the balcony. So that's a lie. And King was also not a communist. King, in fact, disparaged communism in many of his speeches. In fact, the most prominent one where he did it was Where Do We Go From Here, which was a talk he gave in November of 1967. He stated that he read Karl Marx and studied him, but that Marx missed a lot. He said Marx didn't borrow from Hegel. He didn't borrow from Hegel enough. He did not look at the core of the problem, which is that communism forgets that life is he said capitalism forgets that life is social, and communism forgets, and the quote is escaping me. Capitalism forgets that life is social. Communism forgets that life is also individual. And so the solution to mankind's problem is found neither in the thesis of communism nor its antithesis of capitalism, but it is found in a higher synthesis that seeks to treat all men as made in the image of God.
Okay. Visanson for 20 said, if the money goes back to the economy, why not just cut the middleman and give it directly to McDonald's, Walmart, KFC, etc.?
I'm not responding to that.
But I mean, I think that's a fair question.
Yeah,
the question. Okay. Well, I think it is, and I think that the negation should be discussed. So the idea is, if you give these restitutions in check form to Black Americans, that's cool because after all, it's just going to go right back into the economy. So if we look at the things that Black Americans spend a lot of their money on, why wouldn't you just do direct corporate welfare then? Because
I'll tell you
that would be
why.
a good thing.
Because Black Americans had free labor extracted from them without payment. And when you work 40 hours a week in this country, your employer cannot tell you where to spend your money, and they can't assume where you'll spend your mony. So give the people that cut the check, or give them the programs that allow them to choose where to spend the money. Don't just automatically give it to KFC. Don't just automatically give it to McDonald's. If they're going to give it to them, allow them to give it to them of their own volition.
But isn't the principle that it would be a good thing to do that? Because after all, Blacks are spending it in the economy.
The principle would be to give the check to whom it was owed.
Okay, but but in addition to that, you said Black people are going to just put it right back into the economy. So wouldn't that just mean direct payments into the economy are also good things?
No, not within the confines of what we're talking about.
Why not?
I just explained why.
Actually, it doesn't negate the principle. You say no because that would cut out
If
blacks
free
from having
if you
choice.
work
I
for
agree
40
with
hours
that.
a week,
Yeah,
if you work for 40 hours a week,
yeah,
your employer does not have the right to assume. No one has the right to assume where you'll spend your money.
yeah. I get
What you
that
are
part.
owed is money. So that's it.
Yeah, but I understand that part. So
And there's nothing else
it's
to add if you
the
understand that
second part
Andrew.
that I don't get, which is when you say, "But who cares? Even if we did do that, because they're going to put it back into the economy." If that's the case, and putting it quote back in the economy is good, then why not actually just do a bunch of social welfare or direct payments into the economy
Because it
anyway?
doesn't directly benefit Black Americans. Giving money to McDonald's or KFC doesn't directly benefit Black Americans.
But it
It's a
is
stupid
beneficial
question.
if they spend the money on those things.
I'm not responding to that any further, Andrew.
Okay.
All right, well, we'll go to the next one, which is from Del Phil, which says, why does Austin put on the fake voice? It sounds arrogant and deceptive. Is there a fake voice, Austin?
There's no fake voice. I've been told I sound like a Southern preacher from the time I was 5 years old.
Black Americans are not the number one consumer in America. Black, $1.6 trillion. White Americans, $16 to $18 trillion. Austin can't be honest.
Per capita. That's where I'll cite Andrew. Per capita we are.
Is that even true?
In terms of consumption spending, yes.
Red Fox says for 20, Austin, if blacks are better off today in the USA than they would have been in Africa, do they owe money to cover the cost of the voyages to the US?
What? Well, if blacks are better off today, no.
Dartho Mass sends 50 and says, Austin, you stated at the beginning that you would only defend your syllogism using the historical period starting with redlining to present day and would leave anything related to the era of slavery out of it. What happened?
Conversation happened.
Black Americans are not the largest consumer demographic on a per capita basis. Research on consumer expenditures consistently show that Black consumers hold significant overall buying power. Their total per capita in household spending is lower than that of their white counterpart households. So that was actually not factual either, sir.
Jardy says for 20, since Austin said reparations for Jim Crow, my grandparents came in the early 1900s but supported MLK. Why do I have to pay for no racism for your inherently racist idea? We supported civil rights but still need to be punished.
I'm not talking about an individual. Again, I'm talking about the U.S. government. We're going to disagree about what that means. That's something I've already asked and answered 100,000 times.
If it was about reimbursing slavery, shouldn't it make more sense that only the slave states pay?
Not necessarily, because there was overt racism. As King put it, there was overt racism in the South. There was covert racism in the North. So the entire U.S. government is culpable, and it was the entire U.S. government when a Supreme Court justice had the ability to say that a black man has no rights that he is a white man is bound to respect. That implicates the entire government, not just the Southern states, as well as the fact that Abraham Lincoln said he would keep the Union together if he could do it without freeing a slave. The entire U.S. government is guilty of the way that it treated Black Americans, not just the Southern states.
Rachel Wilson says Austin's argument is basically the same thing as saying that if George Washington stole from someone, that Donald Trump stealing from some other random person today would somehow be restorative justice.
That's not my argument. You obviously didn't follow the logic.
Andrew,
I followed the logic.
Not that well.
Andrew,
Very
isn't
well.
the welfare analogy flawed? DEI considers race and gender. Welfare is based on poverty. So higher black per capita use proves poverty overrepresentation, not a race-based benefit. Good job, Dr. Julio.
Using my nickname. Good to see you, brother.
Yeah. So how would this be a negation, even if it was the case that that it's just because, well, black people are more poor? How would that in any way form justice if the idea for justice is to give what is due? Is it my fiscal responsibility to take care of poor people against my own will. I think that would negate the very principle of justice that
Going
our
back
friend
to
here
the-
has put down.
But that goes back to the problem, Andrew. Black people had a higher chance of being in poverty because of the fact that they were systematically excluded from wealth creation for a longer period of time than white Americans. So this person's
But even
question
granting
is
that
valid.
doesn't help the argument.
Granting
It's just trading one injustice for another injustice.
Yeah, if you say so at this point.
Jardy says, now let's see some consistency, Austin. If it's true slavery bad and the descendants of slavers need to be punished, then we should see you lobby for reparations from West African countries that enslaved them before selling them.
Except the fact I wasn't born in West Africa. I was born in the United States of America.
LT Jr. says, Andrew, do current US citizens have a responsibility to use their tax dollars to pay for our federal debt? And can citizens only inherit assets and not debt?
Well, no. I mean, according to the Constitution, there's going to be some kind of levy assessment. As to what your duty is for the federal debt, I think that that's highly debatable. So I think that the United States government and its addiction to having a debt-based economy, using your Social Security number as its guarantor for who it's going to pay back what, I think that needs to be reevaluated immediately. I like the Jackson model much better. And I also think that you can, when it comes to debt, the U.S. government can do other things too. That's what we used to pay, or that's what tariffs used to be for. Direct income taxes, that's a brand new system. And it's flawed because it's tiered. It punishes people who do well because it gives them different tiers in taxation. That's basically what happens with universal suffrage. The underclass votes themselves a raise from people who are doing better than they are. And that's one of the biggest fucking problems in the nation. And there's all sorts of ways that the government can assess and pay its debt by not using direct to person taxation, especially at other countries' expenses if you use the tariff system correct.
Avilios said for 50, thank you for the generous donation, says, we tried the EBT Section 8 reparations for the last 30 years, and your dream has become the rest of our nightmare. Why should we tolerate 13% constantly playing on the victim card? Why should veterans put up with you? We earned our place.
Well, first of all, my daddy and my uncle are veterans, so I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Secondly, I'm not for black people playing the victim card. I despise perpetual victimhood. I think that's one of the greatest problems that exist in the black community. If you obviously didn't listen to my opening statement, I'm not here to defend perpetual victimhood. One of the primary reasons I would love to see black people get some form of reparative justice, whatever it may be, whether it's a check, whether it's targeted programs for homeownership, is so that black people can finally shut the hell up about racism. I'm sick of my people having this as an excuse and a crutch to lean on. I want to see an America where this is no longer a conversation. It's one of the only reasons I even engaged in this debate to begin with.
Chaw says, I'm pretty sure it's fairly well established that as a monolith, how you're talking about restitution, it's fairly well established that black Americans are currently a net tax negative. Isn't this already reparations?
No.
Joel says, when it comes to reparations, is there anything else black people want instead of money?
Land. Or in my case, education. I would say education. You can keep the money. Just pay for free college for black Americans for the next 30 years if they can prove they're descendant of American slaves. Because not everybody would go to college anyway.
But what if
Now,
they want to study something really like
where would they get?
useless?
Where would the federal government get the land?
Well, I mean, they just said what else? I'm saying I've seen reparations arguments for land. I've seen reparations arguments for education. I didn't do an investigation as to where they would get the land, how any of that would work. But I'm saying that is another form of reparations that I've seen discussed by Darity. And who else was it? It was another name that escapes me, but that was the other plan. I've seen land, I've seen money, and I've seen education as usually the top three.
And Typerp says, give me free stuff, master shit. Unbelievable, Typerp. Mr. Northumberland says for 20, if there'd be a risk of creating more division amongst the black community if reparations, whether it be money or land, were only given to black people who could prove their ancestors were slaves, would it be worth it?
Yeah.
At the risk of division.
Yeah, black people are already divided amongst. I mean, half the black. There's a 86% of people voted for Kamala in the last election. I think only 13% of black people voted for Trump. I was one of the 13% that voted for Trump. The black community is already divided. I don't care about internal division. Jesus himself said he didn't come to unite, he came to divide. I don't care about excessive division.
All right, gentlemen. Well, that wraps it up for now, unless something else comes in. Before we head off, Austin, give us any places that anybody can find you and what you've got coming up in the future.
I've got a news show that I've started with Jubilee. It's called The Split. You can find me there on their YouTube channel. You can find me on YouTube at Austin Offscript, TikTok at Real Austin Offscript, and Instagram at Austin Offscript.
Any last words, Andrew?
No, appreciate the debate. You guys have a good day.
Fantastic. All right, fellas. Great to have you both, and I'll see you next time. All right, chat. I am absolutely knackered. Nearly 3:30 a.m. over here, so I'm going to head off and go to bed. I've got to be up for a flight in 5 hours, so I'm going to go rest. Peace out, guys. Have a great morning, afternoon, evening, whatever it is. See you next time.